Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
We had an executive session which went just a tad longer, so I apologize for keeping you late. I'd like to call to order the regular meeting of the Fairfield Board of Education for June 26, 2018. Present is Ms. Pitko, Ms. Leeper, Mrs. Vitale, Mrs. Gerber, myself, Philip Dwyer, Mrs. Jacobson, Mr. Asa, Mrs. Maxon Kennelly, and Mr. Peterson. If I could have you all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Go back over here now. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So I'm going to assume something, that the audience members that are here are not here to hear about the Holland Hill FF&E plans. Is that a fair statement? Okay. We always try and defer to a volunteer chair of a building committee who sometimes would like to report and then be on their way. And so I'll ask the board for unanimous consent to consider, where's the item? 5A at this time.
No, 6B.
6B. 6B.
It's FF&E.
Oh, yeah, 6B. My apologies. Yes, 6B. Seeing no objection, it is moved to start with item 6B, and I'll ask the chairman of the building committee to come forward. Mr. Quinn.
Can't forget my name. Well, school's out, and all our people are busy. We've laid the concrete for the expansion. We're tearing down walls and floors while we speak, and remediating any PCB and asbestos that we find. And we're finding it, obviously. You always get surprised no matter how much you do work up front. But we're not in any problem area, either time-wise or fiscally. Everything is on schedule. And we're, really starting to find the little things in the roof and the ceiling that somebody says, well, what are all those wires for? And so we'll find out and pull them out if they don't belong. But everything's going along on plan, bottom line. And the other thing is I'm here tonight.
So let me get the official motion on the table now that you've given your kind of update. The recommended motion is that the Board of Education approve the plans and specifications for the Holland Hill FF&E. Mrs. Gerber, Mr. Acer, it's moved and seconded. It's now before us. Bring us up to date on that.
Our estimate going in was for $200,000 for FF&E, and that was in our budget. After we meticulously went through every classroom, every nook and cranny, and made sure we did what was right by the town and the students and the teachers, we came out to $202,000.4. So we're 2,400 within target. And we know, considering I've done a couple other things with the schools before, when we go to bid, we'll save another 10 to 20%, probably more like 10 with the tariffs going on right now, but it still will be well under our estimate. So I ask you to approve that. We're all on target.
Questions from the board? Mrs. Gerber.
Sure.
This isn't a question, but it's just more clarification. So, I mean, this is a technicality, something that the board needs to do just to kind of check a box off so that it can go to the state. And so this is one of a few different things that we have with each building project.
That's correct.
So I don't have any questions because I know it's all been spelled out in great detail. But yeah, so just wanted to make that clear, especially to the new board members.
Yeah, it's
Because of the state,
200,000
we
out of
frequently-
18 million.
Because of the state, we frequently vote redundantly on the same issue. Questions or comments from the board members? Mr. Asa.
I'd just like to thank Chairman Quinn and the building committee for their hard work on this project and for doing an outstanding job of keeping it on at or just under budget.
Thank you. Got a good committee.
That follows direction very well.
We have a very good committee.
Any other comments or questions from the board? This is a voting item. Any member of the public wish to come forward and comment on the Holland Hill plans for FF&E furnishings and equipment? Seeing none come forward. Any other questions from the board? Seeing none. The motion before you is that the Board of Education approve the plans and specifications for the Holland Hill FF&E. All in favor, please raise your hand. It is unanimous, passes 9-0. Thank you for your service.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your consideration in moving me up. I appreciate it. Now I'll go work on Mill Hill.
So now we're back to item number 3 on our agenda, and we'll follow through for the balance the agenda schedule. Public comment. Public is invited to comment on agenda items only. For those of you who may not have been here before, we have a limit of 3 minutes. You don't have to take all of the 3 minutes, but that's the limit that we have. Anybody wish to come forward and talk about any of our agenda items? Seeing none? So now on to item number 4. The board knew that last meeting, the Finance Committee had talked about a new way of receiving board materials through e-communication, and the representative from CABE is here to present to us on that. And I take it that we have a presentation that will require the screen, so we'll move over while Ms. Lisa Steimer comes up. Ms. Leeper, do you have any opening comments that you wish to make before the presentation as chair of the Finance Committee?
I just want to actually thank Mr. Asa for initiating this, and I'm hoping that the full board will be as enthused about it as we are. But if Mr. Asa has any comments?
No, I just, this was something that I thought was important to explore as we move forward and all of the technology integration into the school system and the kids' 21st century learning. As has been said before, even though we're 18 years into the 21st century, that I think it was important to at least explore the board going paperless as much as possible, not just for savings, but just to kind of mimic and even go along with the students that we are helping guide. So that was it.
So, you're on the Finance Committee. Do you have any comment that you want to make now?
I'm
No?
good.
Okay. So,
Thank you, though.
let us move away and begin.
Well, thank you for having me here this evening. While the screen gets going here, I'll just make some introductory remarks. As Chairman Dwyer said, my name is Lisa Steimer. I'm the Senior Staff Associate for Professional Development and Communications at CABE. So I'm responsible for the convention, workshops, the CABE Journal, any publication, social media. So really anything that engages our members sort of falls under my direction. So on behalf of all of us at CABE, as I said, thank you for having me here, but also thank you for your continued membership. I present rather informally, so should you have questions, please feel free to interrupt me and ask them. But knowing that you have a whole evening's agenda ahead of you, I will try to keep my remarks concise, but give you enough information, hopefully, so that you can see what CABE meeting has to offer you. Just by way of some background, CAVE spent a number of years looking into different options, such as CAVE Meeting, which we're going to look at shortly. 11 years ago, we were approached by Apple, and at that time, their product was something like $11,000 a year for a school district, which we found to be just a little crazy. So we were approached by Kentucky School Boards Association. They had developed this great product, and it made sense to us because school boards are school boards as far as we were not taking a round peg trying to put into a square hole. So this made a lot of sense. So back in 2005, Middletown Public Schools piloted this for us for a year, giving us continual feedback about how it worked for a Connecticut school district. And their advice and recommendations were implemented into the product. Currently, there are 21 school districts in Connecticut who use this. In Tennessee, there are 40 school districts. And in the state of Kentucky, there are 106 school districts, 33 schools, and 10 other agencies such as like the State Department of Education, that sort of thing. And we look at this as a service to our members. We're not looking at making millions of dollars off of this, but we want to help our members do their business more effectively and efficiently. So that attitude really helps us control the cost. While this is a very good product, it continues to be updated continually. We have regular partner meetings providing feedback of listening to our users, what would make it better and function more efficiently for school districts. What's important to note before we get going into this is a district can go 100% paperless and just say, that's it, we're cutting off paper. But you can also do a hybrid of it, so it can be used as your means of distribution. And should you want to print things or ask that something be printed for you, that's still an option as well. And I find that it really depends on the needs of the board and the personality of the board. So with that introduction, I'm now going to turn to the demonstration. If you look at the screen here, right now it's pretty bland, and I'd be the first to admit it. One of the things Kentucky School Boards Association is undergoing in the next year is really revamping the look of the product, which will also affect some of the functionality that staff might use to create your agendas. And in fact, it would make it more efficient and even more efficient. So anyway, I'm going to log into a dummy account that we have created in a board member view. It's not the view that staff would see in developing the agenda. Something important to notice before we even get logged in, right here you see forgot your password. So should a person forget their password, all you need to do is remember your email and populate the top field here with that. Click on forget your password. It will send you an email telling you what your password is. One of the things that is going to be improved in the coming year is some of that security, so it may ask you to change it going forward, but for right now you do get an email just reminding you what it is. Okay, I don't want to remember that. Okay. So when board members sign in, they see a page very similar to this. In your case, if you were to be using it, it would say Fairfield Board of Education calendar. Sort of a look at this page. Over here in the upper left-hand side, our board meetings listed. You can see that they're linked when you hover on them, and I will be clicking through one of them shortly, but if you click, you go immediately to that particular agenda. You can also see on the calendar for the month of June that there's a meeting here. It's also hyperlinked. If I were to click on that, that would also take me to the meeting down here. That's where I want it to be. Up here, there are a couple of things that are important, particularly my account. When I train a Board of Education to use this product, the first thing I do is, after they log in, is take them to my account, and we change your password, because when board members are all set up, it's one password for training purposes, and then we go and make a unique login for each individual. Here under links are links that are of interest to school boards. So for instance, I put CABE here, Connecticut Strategic School Profiles. You might want to put your policies there, your online policies, those sorts of things. So if I was simply to click on CABE, as way of an example, it brings you to the CABE website, and then you could click through there should you want to. Are you all good so far? Okay. So I'm going to go into a sample agenda that I've created, and it follows the format pretty much of a board meeting, and I have included some things that you would certainly have a lot more of with a school district's agenda. First thing is how you navigate through here. I should note right here you can make this wider or more narrow. And for instance, I noticed you had a recommended motion for your motion just before my presentation. There is a way that your superintendent's secretary can add that information here when building the agenda, so it's right there for you as well. Navigating through the agenda is as simple as either clicking, and you go through the agenda that way. Also using these arrows right on either side of autopilot. So clicking on the arrows pointing to the right will bring you further into the agenda. Clicking on the arrows to the left would bring you back up in the agenda. There is also a feature which it's entirely the decision of the school board whether they decide to use it or not, called autopilot. If a board member was to click on autopilot and somebody who had what we call meeting manager rights, so pretty much someone who could build your agenda, was using the product and had clicked that they were the leader, as that person progressed through the agenda, your screen would also progress through the agenda. You can pop out of that feature anytime you want, because if you have a thought you want to add a note to a particular agenda item that's upcoming, you can do so, and then you can rejoin autopilot. It's not like a conference call where if you leave early, you're announced leaving early, or if you join late, you're announced as joining late. It's just something that you have the ability to do should you choose. And again, that's a board decision whether or not to use that particular feature. So that's navigating through the agenda. A few things that I want to point out to you, and some of them I'll do rather quickly in the interest of time. There we go. You do have several reports available to you, so should you be somebody who prefers to look at a paper agenda, you do have that opportunity here to do that. It opens up a Word document that has the agenda. Not much is done to make it look attractive, but it's there, and you can work with it to make it a little more attractive. But should you prefer a paper copy, you can do that. Okay. There we go. What else do I want to show you here? So that, for reports, I think is probably the one that you would be most interested in at this point in time, but there are others. Following a meeting, you could access the minutes, but know that those would be in very rough draft format if you were so interested in looking at it immediately following your board meeting when you got home, which I hope you wouldn't want to necessarily relive it all that soon, but they're in very rough draft at that point. So we know that the bulk of your agenda is not so much the actual agenda document, but it's all the supporting information that builds your packet. So the meeting manager who builds the agenda has the opportunity to add what we call attachments. And let me see, I think I may have put one here. I did not put one there, let's see. Okay. So financial report would make sense that there would be an attachment with supporting information. You can see in two places that it tells you there's an attachment. One is up here, right above, and one is over here in the right-hand side. I'm just going to open it. It's a very sparse Excel document. But it opens up the document in its true form. It doesn't take it and water it down in any way, shape, or form. But it opens the true Excel document. Similarly, it would open, if you so chose, Word, PowerPoint. You can add video. But certainly with Excel, PowerPoint, and Word documents, I suggest that they're added as a PDF document, just to minimize the opportunity for the attachments to be edited in any way. So really with any of these that would have something like that, and I know I added several others in here, perhaps here, perhaps not. But that's how easy it is for a board member to access the attachments. Something else I know a lot of folks do is add notes to their agendas. You might handwrite a note to ask a question, that sort of thing. You do have the opportunity to add notes and a note about notes. These are your own individual notes. Because you have a unique login, your fellow board members, no one can access these notes. They are yours and yours only. However, I always caution people about what they put in the notes, but those are your notes. And then the question that almost immediately follows when I start talking about notes is, well, what about FOI? These notes are no more FOI-able than the notes you handwrite on your packet. So, you know, ask about this, ask about that. Same thing as if you were handwriting it on the packet. So, and I regularly check with our council just to confirm that the FOI Commission has not changed their thinking on that, but right now, that's how it stands. It's important to note a few things. This can be used for your regularly scheduled board meetings, special board meetings, committee meetings, those sorts of things. Should you choose to use it for committee meetings, it can be set up so that only the appropriate people receive that information. So I don't know if your committees are committees of the whole or whatnot, but if it was a part of the board, just those particular people would receive it. If you have community members who serve on your committees, they would receive that committee information, but they would not receive the board packets. There is a feature in here that is a goals report. So when an agenda is built, each agenda item can be linked to a goal that the board might have, or superintendent, that sort of thing, and you can generate a report showing, well, we talked about these particular goals with these particular subjects on this date, and it will generate a report for you. So it's really nice to see that how you're keeping on track as far as what the work of the board should be. Probably the biggest thing that I think is something that is helpful to board members is the search feature, because how often have you had to go through your stack of paper and start flipping through? I remember it was a meeting sort of in this time frame, you know, that sort of thing, and you're frustrated, you're looking, you get paper cuts, that sort of thing. CABE Meeting has a search feature, and I'm going to just quickly show it to you. So I typed in the word superintendents, knowing that there would be superintendent's reports throughout the Nutmeg Board's CABE meeting. So you can see in this first grouping of search results are agendas, where that particular word happens in the agenda item. So you can see that shows up in your first set of results. Your second set of results are file attachments, so the bulk of your packet where that particular word shows up. PDFs that are saved as PDFs versus PDFs that are scanned on a copy machine and saved as a PDF are searchable. The ones done on a copy machine are an image and they're not searchable. But most are saved, file save as, and then change the file type. So those would be searchable. You can drill down as far as you want. If you know the dates something happened, you can simply add the, enter the dates. And should you really want to drill down because you've been using this for 5, 6, 7 years and you know that the results are just going to be really cumbersome to sort through, you can even drill down further and know that your notes are searchable by you, not by your fellow board members. Yes.
I think this is good. I think we get the general. Is
Yes.
there a way that you could show us the actual example of one of the districts that's using this, so we could see like
The
what
public
we
portal?
would see, but also the public portal? I think that's important. That would be great if we could move through that.
Absolutely, I'm
Thank
happy to
you.
do that. So I anticipated that question, and what I have in front of us here is Windsor Public Schools website and how it is seen by the public. So if the public were going to look for meetings and/or minutes, this is what they would see. So it's divided into 2 columns, board meetings and then committee meetings over here. They're sorted by date within each column. These are blank here with the minutes simply because the meeting manager has not had the opportunity to add them here at the moment. But you can see that the public would be able to view an agenda here and they'd be able to print it if they wish, that sort of thing. And also to view the minutes. And you can see the minutes here with actions taken, that sort of thing, here as well. So that is the public view. Is that what you were
Yeah,
looking for?
do you have the Windsor Public Schools brought up where you could see how they would click through to it?
Oh, no, I don't. Let me see if I can get one for you if you give me just a moment.
It's okay if you're not.
I mean, I think that the best that I could do at the moment is to take you more through perhaps the agenda that I have set up, the sample one, if you wanted that.
Yeah, I think what I was getting at was that the way our IT department would integrate this would be a link through the Fairfield Public Schools website. So
Correct.
the public would go just like they do now to the main website,
Yep.
and they would link through to this slightly differently than what they do now. So
So are you wanting to see what the Windsor website before you get to the pages?
that's
that
okay. That's fine.
Because I can do that very quickly. That's easy. So I'm just accessing the Windsor Board of Education's website, and I would simply here click on Board of Ed meeting agendas minutes, and it brings me right to the page that we were looking at. Does that answer?
Yes.
Okay, great. Great. Something along the lines of the searchable feature it was also mentioned that there might be some interest in the online policy service that we provide, which is also searchable and linked to statute. I did bring information on that. I am not the policy person at all, but I did bring information for you on that. Any other questions? Something I haven't hit on that you want to know if this does or know more about? Yes.
I guess thinking about how I might use this as a board member. If we have our own accounts, occasionally we are, in the course of business, see sensitive or non-public information. Is this secure enough that it would allow that sort of dissemination?
Yes, it is an HTTPS website, and it is secure, and with the upgrades coming up, if there's anything, for instance, as I was mentioning the password, if you forgot it and clicking on it, it will, the security will be even improved from there, but it is HTTPS, not just HTTP. Does that answer?
I guess the follow-up question would be, do other school districts use it in that capacity for non-public information?
Well, so if you were meeting an executive session or something like that, that sort of information? Would that be an example of what you might be
You know,
thinking?
like personnel contract negotiations,
Yep.
that sort of thing.
Yes, when the meeting manager creates your agendas, first of all, when the attachments are added, they default to the most private setting, which is only for the meeting manager and superintendent to be able to see them. The meeting manager then, depending on what the information is, determines who can see it from there. And there are 4 or 5 levels of lessening security, if you will, from there that protect the documents.
And I think just one more thing to note, that Meg went through a presentation on this, and I met with her and the IT website gentleman, but she was very comfortable, and I don't want to speak for you, Meg, but it seemed, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it seemed very intuitive and easy to use and would be simple for her and not any extra undue work. And ultimately, comparing what the cost of the paper that we give out and whatnot would technically yield a savings, so.
So I think she's done with the presentation, so I'll get the whole board back and then we'll continue with Q&A. So, Mr. Asa, did you have any follow-up questions from where you were? Then I think I saw Mrs. Maxon Cannelli's hand.
Yeah, so just so I'm clear in terms of the searchable function, if it was an agenda item, obviously, if it was the name of a file, it's searchable, but content would not be. If you're trying to remember a question you asked and you think it would be found in the minutes, you can't search at that level, is that correct?
It does search the content, yes.
Oh, it does.
It's not just the document title.
Okay.
Yep.
And then, my second question, so the only way to mark them is in a separate notes field? You can't actually annotate the documents themselves?
And that is something I have asked for, but have not seen it from a programming end yet, but right now that is the case. You're correct.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions from board members? Mrs. Jacobson?
Is there a backup process?
It's backed up on 2 servers, double redundancy through Kentucky School Boards Association.
Okay. Now that's it for right now.
Anybody else? Mr. Asa?
Not a question for the presenter, but just one more thing to note. In discussing this, one of the things that I noticed was that our policies, especially regarding public notice and whatnot, may be slightly outdated. So if this were something that the board decided that they wanted to explore more or eventually move towards, I would recommend that an amendment to the policy regarding, stand by one second, Section 3, Notice of Meetings. Part A talks about notice to board members, which is pretty much the same.
I think you're referring to a section in our bylaws.
Oh, 9,000. Yes, bylaws. Sorry, bylaws. And under Part C of that, to encourage public interest, the agenda for every meeting shall be posted on the school district's website and released in advance. Talks about local newspapers, public libraries, and some of this stuff that we might not necessarily do now, but could do via a link just sent out one time. So might be something that we want to discuss more when that time comes.
On a humorous note, you say everybody has their own code. Does the chairman of the board be able to see who's read the packet in advance?
You don't get to see that. However, depending on how the packet is distributed, you would see who had accessed it. You could be told how
Is the
that went.
expectation that we would bring a laptop to the meetings and just work off of a laptop?
If you so desired, you can use a tablet. You can use a laptop if you wish. Something that's internet-based. I mean, I've seen people use their phones, which I wouldn't recommend because I think you'd be cross-eyed by the end of your meeting. But as long as you had internet access on your device, you would be able to use it.
Other questions that the board has? Mrs. Jacobson?
Or we could print out what we wanted to bring. Right.
Correct.
Okay.
That's the hybrid model that I referred to early on, yes.
Now, at the moment, the board gets it by email. We no longer deliver Friday packets to you to have the paper in front of you for the weekend, but we do have a packet at the table for you so that you could have read it on the screen but have a paper packet here. I presume the concept is that we would not have the paper packet here. I also presume that for those of you like tonight who don't want to print out a 100-page FF&E specification book, that you could always come down to the central office and say, could you print out X? I will say that I think this feature probably appeals to the secretary, to the superintendent, because it probably would be a great work saver for her. And if the only thing that occurred is that she maintained this and all 9 of us still came down and said, could you print it out? We would actually be increasing her workload. And so I think before we go in this direction, I think there'd have to be some sentiment that board members gave for the finance committee to continue to follow up on this as to whether they value this approach and would like to go in this direction. Is that a fair, that's what you're looking for tonight? Yes. Okay, so Mr. Asa.
Yeah, and getting back to your point about a laptop, that is a question that I did ask our website gentleman here in the central office, and the premise was that it's easy. It's web based, so it's easily viewable in a web browser on a tablet, such as like an iPad. But it's also on a phone, as Lisa mentioned. You'd have to stretch it and expand it, but on a tablet it is good. So you could use your own tablet, or one of the things that we discussed, and if the board so wishes, we would discuss further, would be those who needed it being issued a tablet, public school owned tablet for that purpose. So everyone would have some sort of electronic device at their desk.
And like students, we would be responsible for that tablet and return it.
Yes.
Mrs. Gerber.
One question is about members of the public. Would we still provide copies of the materials at our meetings like we always put them in the back of the room? Would that still happen or no?
Mr. Asa, you want to respond?
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing that I did discuss, and one thing that Meg has noticed over time, that they print a certain number of copies for that back table, and the majority of them are still there at the end of the night, even with high public turnout. So I don't think it would be unreasonable to print some copies, but I do believe that the majority of people in the audience do have, some sort of electronic device or smartphone, and for that purpose, for seeing the agenda and whatnot, might be manageable. Obviously, looking at a 148-page FF&E document might be tough, but yeah.
Other questions or comments from board members? Mrs. Maxon Connelly.
Just to play devil's advocate, and I thank you for the presentation. I appreciate the work of the Finance Committee of bringing something forward. But to play devil's advocate, why couldn't we do exactly what we're doing right now and simply issue a new edict that this won't be printed? I mean, right now on the website, we have an agenda column, we have a minutes column. If you click on the agenda, I do like the search feature. I do think that sounds intriguing. But until I can annotate those documents, it's for the fact of being able to click on an agenda item and have it pop up as opposed to scroll down a page. I'm not sure that that is the investment that we want. So I'm not seeing the benefit that would be worth a $3,000 investment. The annotating would change it a lot for me personally. And I do appreciate the search feature, but I don't understand how this is that much of an improvement on what we already have.
And for the benefit of the CABE, we already have a search feature. It's called, we call Mrs. Gerber. And in a few moments, she finds it for us. Mr. Asa.
I'm hoping that's actually a good question, and I asked the same question, and our IT representative had a pretty good answer, but I can't really repeat what he said because I didn't understand 100% of it. But it did seem that the process actually improves greatly versus what we do now and how our technology is now. And maybe Dr. Jones, could you speak to that at all? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Yeah, I don't remember what the question was that went to him, but one thing that we must move away from is we're very PDF heavy, and we are very much so on the board. And one of the reasons we are upgrading our website and going to a new web platform is because we're not ADA compliant, and PDFs are not ADA compliant. And this would actually help us make sure that what the board is doing is also going to be cohesive with our website.
Yeah, and also, just one more thing to note. Right now, that kind of triggered my memory. Right now, they bring mega document, it's got to be converted to PDF, and that has to be added. And again, that ADA compliance. With this system, it would, as she showed, would actually be those documents that would be compliant with those federal guidelines. And as far as entering and putting everything together, there's not that redundant step of turning things into the PDF. The system does or manages everything for you.
If you saw my eyes glaze over halfway through that, I would be perfectly happy if I could just forward my question to maybe Dr. Jones and to Mrs. Leeper, and if you could get me an answer that I'm getting.
So I know that it's a quick presentation, but I think the Finance Committee would appreciate some verbal message that said, yes, I'm very much interested, I'd like to continue to explore it, or whether, I got a lot of questions and I'm not convinced yet.
Could I?
Mrs. Leeper, Ms. Leeper.
From my understanding, our IT rep who came to our meeting said, we actually have to change from what we're doing right now. So we have to pick between the different options, and this is by far the more affordable option, because we're redoing the website and our whole system is changing and we're not compliant, so we have to move to something that is compliant. So that's why are we changing sort of kind of holistically to your question compared to what we're doing now. We can no longer continue to do what we're doing now, so this is the more affordable option. One of the other options that was presented was like $10,000 a year, or not a year, but to convert over to. And I don't want to speak for you, Meg, but my impression was that this is a much more time efficient than also the current system. And then I know it's $3,000 to sign on, but even in the first year we would save almost $2,000 from the current method, and then after that we'd be saving $3,400 a year on average, and those are really low estimates. That's literally only factoring the actual paper. It's not factoring in toner or staples or staff time. Just so you don't think we're signing on to something that is costing us money just because we couldn't come up with something better to do.
Now, Mrs. Brown does not have a microphone, but I will represent on behalf of Ms. Leeper and Mrs. Brown that this is something that they both, but Mrs. Brown specifically, who chugs through all this stuff, would like to explore. So that you know this is something the administration is on board with, going down this path. Can I get a kind of go around the table and get a sense of where people are?
Yeah, I guess I was with Ms. Maxon Kennelly in terms of how it's different from what we do now, but the ADA compliance issue seems to be very significant in this discussion. So absolutely happy to look at it further.
I'm happy to look at it further, but the $2,000 savings you reference, I would contrast that with the $5,000 savings if we simply didn't do anything and simply said, board members, you're responsible for your own access to the material, because I'm not getting the piece of, I don't understand how ADA compliance means I can't click on something on our district website. I'm just missing that whole work piece. I don't know what's going on behind the scenes to load an agenda and attachments onto our website. That's the piece I simply don't know, and so that's where I'm stuck, is at 2,000 versus 5,000. I'll save the 5,000, and I'm understanding there's more, but that's the part that's missing.
There is a lot of debate as to whether your software is ADA compliant. I've read a couple of articles on it. I have no clue what they say, but I know that that is a serious issue for school boards, to not be ADA compliant, and we are not. So that is a
I
serious
accept
issue.
that,
Yeah.
Obviously, I'd like to explore it further, but just, I think Ms. Maxon-Canelli makes a good point that one thing that maybe Dr. Jones and Ms. Leeper can do would be to get kind of a summary from the IT department, which better explains this for her.
Mrs. Jacobson?
Yeah, of course, yeah. Interested in continuing to look at it, knowing that we can still print if we wanted to. And I just had one last question was, as we change over, and you don't have to answer this now, but the archiving of the current site and all of the content that we currently possess, does that transfer over, or what is happening with all of the content that's on our current site?
Okay. Yes, anything that helps administrative staff do a more efficient job, I'm always in favor of. Mrs. Gerber?
As am I, and just, I completely agree with that sentiment, but I also just would like to get some more information, so if we could get the IT explanation, that would be helpful.
Mrs. Vitale?
Nothing further to add, just really more detail from the IT department. We did get it in our committee, and I'm not going to attempt to relay it because it won't be accurate.
Why don't I go to Ms. Pitko, and then I'll have Ms. Leeper have the last word. Ms. Pitko.
I appreciate the presentation, the information. I look forward to the extra information. Just a heads up, I don't own an electronic device, so I will be one of those people that requires one. And I prefer paper books. I prefer paper to go through and make my notes, so I will be the PETA who asks for the paper copy.
And with no other comments, Ms. Leeper, you have the last word.
I actually also appreciate paper, but I'm happy to print. I actually always end up printing before we get to the board table anyways, so I feel like, sort of to Ms. Maxon-Canelli's point, we could have probably been saving money for a while, because I always have a printed version, not 145-page PP&E, but, or FF&E, but I'll definitely get the IT summary, although I think sort of crucial to it is that we have to change to something. So the idea to just continue what we're doing and ask Meg to no longer print anything isn't necessarily an option on the table, but I'll confirm that. And that this was by far the most affordable option to convert to. And I also think that we'll probably, whatever motion we maybe end up eventually voting on, should incorporate some sort of hybrid for certain types of documents over a certain length, maybe being printed upon request or whatever it is. So I would appreciate if other board members would give the wording for a potential hybrid some thought, so we can continue the conversation on that.
Mrs. Vitale?
Sorry. Through the chair to Dr. Jones, do you need the board to take action or make any kind of decision on this? I don't want to hold up any work that needs to be done by staff. Like if the IT department's moving, redesigning a website and needs to have this piece decided on, I think the board needs to know that, so we're not holding you up, or
It is generally more of a management decision, but we knew we didn't want to have mutiny at the board table either. So it's trying to make, because it is a big change to go electronic, but we do have to make the change. And just to give kind of in a nutshell, when you talk about compliancy, part of that is, if you think about like 365, if you're online with the software, anybody that has a 365, there's a reader function. So somebody who is blind can still access those documents as long as the reader will actually read the text to them. And that's something on our website right now. You can't use any of that software for students, for people, anybody that has a disability. Oh, that's like Office, Microsoft Office. Sorry. All right. So
It also raises the question, if we do get devices, tablets of some kind, will that software be loaded? Will we be able to view these documents on those tablets?
yes, as a matter of fact, I mean, from the district perspective, we're rolling out Chromebooks is the device that we have, and so we're used to being in that Google platform or O365, and either one of those, Microsoft or Google, have the reader functionality, so that if you have a disability and you need that, it's available. What we do right now, the vast majority of our website, for somebody who has a disability, they cannot access our content.
So with Mrs. Vitale's comment in mind, how about if I say it this way? I'll ask for unanimous consent to authorize management to go forward with adopting this under the guidance of the Finance Committee. Does that make sense to the board? Or do you want to have this back on the agenda before you take the next step? Mrs. Gerber?
Well, I guess what is the timeline? I mean, the plan is to do this over the summer?
Ms. Leeper, did you have a sense of when this would be implemented?
I'll refer to Dr. Jones.
We would like to have it timed with the website, which would be the beginning of the school year. They're working on all that migration right now on the website.
So if we followed up at the August meeting, would that give enough time to say, okay, the board said go ahead in August, and let's make it conjunction with the new website in September?
We could do that.
You could do that. Mrs. Jacobson?
So, and the questions that we asked, we're going to hope for answers by August. Is that your goal? So in terms of archiving, and I also had another question, just so you know ahead of time. What's the technical support? If, like, let's say something happens, are we calling Meg? Are we calling CABE? Are we calling a third-party vendor?
Depending on what the issue
Yeah.
was, it would either be me or Meg, depending on, but it wouldn't be an outside vendor.
Okay, all right. Thank
And
you.
if you don't mind, if I can answer two of those questions, we did ask the archiving question, and Marco, who does our website, would actually keep basically the existing page for the old archives, so people could still access that. Then we would move forward with all of the new content with the new platform. So everything would still be available, but we'd be moving forward with the new.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mrs. Brown, if you will, make sure this gets on the August agenda. And Ms. Leeper, you may want to think of getting some memo to the board over the summer that gives more specific guidance on the IT.
Happy to.
And of course, if you have questions that didn't come up today, please contact the superintendent. And now we're going to do something that's somewhat unusual. We will take a 30-second recess while Fair TV resets something. It's yours. Perfect, okay. The technical term was there was a buzz in the system that we needed to eliminate. So that allows us to move on to item 5A, which is approval of the FPS Educator Evaluation Plan. The recommended motion is that the Board of Education approve the FPS Educator Evaluation Plan revisions dated June 2018. Do I have a motion? Mrs. Gerber. Do I have a second? Mr. Asa? Is there a presentation that needs to be made?
No.
This was presented at the last meeting, so it's here for a vote. Any questions that board members have on the revisions? Mrs. Maxon Canali.
Not so much a question, just a statement. I mean, obviously, it always helps when you know that the committee at work behind it is the one who are vested in its success. So, I just express a sincere hope that this really represents meaningful change that can, free up administrative time for meaningful work and yet also result in meaningful evaluations to help with instructional improvement, work with instructional practices. So I have faith that that was the focus of the committee to make that happen. So I wish, hope we can hear that that's the case.
I have faith in that as well, but I will say that it's tempered with, it still complies with the state requirements, which means that sometimes our staff are doing work that is really not helpful to advancing the work of the district. And so it may be revised slightly, but there's still issues, I would say. Any other questions from the board? If not, any member of the public wish to comment on the motion that's in front of us regarding the revisions to the FPS educator evaluation. Seeing none, back to the board. We'll take a vote on the recommended motion that the Board of Education approve the FPS Educator Evaluation Plan revisions dated June 2018. All in favor, please raise your hand. It is unanimous. That passes 9-0. Thank you very much. Discussion of board goals. As you know, this is an item that it's not district goals. It is goals that the board would want to set for themselves, let's say for the 18-19 year, or we could pick any time period we want. So this is an agenda item that we couldn't get to at the last meeting, so it's on this agenda. Hopefully board members have had some thoughts as to what areas that you'd like to consider, or whatever items, even if an individual member has a thought, we'll put it on a list and talk about it further at the August meeting. Yes, Mrs. Gerber.
Well, just based on past practice of what we've done previously with other boards for goals, my recollection is that we would have board members submit in writing, I believe to the chair and perhaps to Mrs. Brown as well, you know, all the individual things, and then you would compile it and put it together. So I was wondering if it might make more sense in the issue of, you know, time, unless board members have specific things that they really want to bring right now. Maybe it might be helpful to have board members between now and our next meeting, which is until the end of August, submit something to you by a certain date, perhaps the beginning of August, so that it could be compiled, because there may be some that are very similar, that fall under the same general parameters, and then we could discuss it at our August meeting.
Yeah, certainly anything not mentioned tonight, but you think about it tomorrow morning, just send it to Meg and with a copy to me, and it'll get added to the list. And if there's no suggestions tonight, then make sure that you get something to Meg so that we have something to look at in August. Other comments from the board members on board goals? Mrs. Maxon Connelly.
Just to further add to Mrs. Gerber's point about process, because I think it was a successful way that we approached it last time, was not only that they were submitted ahead of time, but then just for new members, that there's the turnaround of returning them to Mrs. Brown with your top 5 picked and ranked. And that scoring system would be, it wasn't a definitive vote, because that we can't vote like that, but that information would come to the board that, you know, if a 5 is your top ranked goal, this one was got 23 points, et cetera, and that could be what frames our discussion and then the selection at August. I thought that was a very fair and open way to do it and give us the people the chance to hear other members out.
That is how we did it. Any of you who have managed that process know that it's always frustrating when 2 or 3 people don't quite meet the August 1st deadline and Mrs. Brown has to chase you down when you're in Tahiti or something. So let's say August 1, so that there's enough time to catch that person who's not in town, and then there's enough time to actually do the math and type it up. There's no, the last time there was no filtering of it. Whoever suggested anything got on the list, it got rated and ranked, and so there's no filtration. Other comments that people wish to make? Any suggestions that you want to make now based on any thoughts that you had in advance? Ms. Leeper.
As a new board member, I'm wondering if we could see previous board goals, just to kind of have an idea of the things prior boards have set as goals.
I think we had, by memory, 2 sets. Yeah, 2 sets.
Is this the type of search function where I should ask Ms. Gerber?
Archivist to work with.
I was actually going to bring them tonight, but I was moving furniture this afternoon, so I didn't get a chance to.
All
But
right, I'll search it. I'll search it later.
Okay, so I'll say that our secretary will get something to Mrs. Brown, who can then circulate it to the board.
Thank you.
Other comments that people wish to make? Mrs. Vitale.
I know this was a past board goal, but I think just revisiting just communication with the public and with other town bodies is something that maybe we want to discuss. I know that it didn't, you, Mrs. Gerber, and Mr. Dwyer did work on it. It didn't fully get adopted by past boards. A lot has changed just in terms of social media and how we communicate with the public, and it might be worth another look at.
So why don't we find that, I'll say, motion and what we did adopt and what we didn't adopt. We didn't adopt the town hall meetings. We just did that anyways. So why don't we get that together so that people know what that is. Other comments from board members, thoughts at the moment? Mrs. Jacobson.
I have many, but I'll submit them in the timeline. But one that I did want to mention tonight, and along the same lines as Mrs. Vitale, was I've been saying and calling for greater collaboration with other town bodies, not necessarily like Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance, but things like Strategic Planning Committee, TOD, P&Z, just things that we mutually impact rather than being in a siloed position, but just greater communication and working together with some of our other town entities would be helpful and would be a goal for mine.
As you know, we maintain liaison positions with a variety of entities, boards, and commissions. Two specifically by their bylaws you're actually members of. Ms. Pitko is a voting member of the Board of Health, and Mrs. Gerber is a voting member of the Parks and Recreation Commission because that's their bylaws. The rest we're really liaisons to, and Mrs. Jacobson is suggesting that there might be another group of town boards and commissions that it would be good for us to be related to. So she'll get that in writing to you. Anything else? Seeing none, so please do, we'll send out an email in the next couple of days, Mrs. Brown, that reminds people to submit them by August 1st. Okay, thank you. Item C, discussion of structural change ideas. This is enclosure number 1. It's following up on the meeting that we had last week, and really the last time we talked about this when we had a special meeting, at which point we had eliminated some things from further consideration, and other items were still on the list. And by my notes, these items were still on the list. I understand that there's item number 5 that has some consternation on the part of some board members. This current board has not talked about class size. The past board talked about it for 30, 40 minutes and decided, really with 4 people saying something to look at and 4 people saying we don't want to look at it. And at the time, I recall saying that we're not going to change something like this on only 30 or 40 minutes of conversation and on a 5-4 basis. So let's defer this to another time. And so that's why I put it on the list. I would say to the public, none of these ideas have a proponent on this board. There's nobody here saying chomping at the bit to do one or the other of them. We have a responsibility, as we always do, to look at how we operate the school district, and is there a way that will enhance the educational goals that we have, while also at the same time improving efficiency and operations. Specifically, other town bodies are always asking us for that purpose. So this is a summary document. It's not an advocacy document. I'd say the other thing is a lot of these ideas are interconnected one with the other. It's hard to talk about one without talking about the other. And so tonight, my goal, I don't know what your goal, individual goals were, is that we set a path forward in a process that says that specifically by next spring, we're able to say we have finished talking about each of these items, and some might come up and be gone quickly, and others might require more research, so that next spring when we go through the budget process, I'll say Mr. Peterson, our liaison to the Board of Finance, can talk about the process we used and the conclusions we came to, and anybody else that we need to report to. At the last meeting, we did vote not to do something. I should have corrected and said Robert's rules really do say you should make motions in a positive manner. So we have 6 items on the agenda, and if somebody says, let's drop this one off the list, my recommendation is that you would put a motion forward that say, let's continue to talk about 1, 2, 4, and 6, and let the others go by, whatever the numbers are. But if the board decides they want to do some action beyond just discussion, You ought to state it in a positive fashion of which of these items we shall continue to talk about and which items, therefore, if they're not on that motion, they drop off the list. With that in mind, do board members have comments that they wish to make? On this item of structural change. Mrs. Gerber, followed by Mrs. Maxon Connelly.
Yeah, just going through the memo we received regarding the conversation on operational effectiveness, I just kind of brainstormed and came up with a lot of different questions on each topic. And knowing that it seems right here, the plan is to discuss all of these in either September or October, I believe, except perhaps the redistricting. I think that was one. But the others were all kind of mentioned in terms of September 25th or October 23rd, I believe. So with that in mind, I'm planning on emailing this. I can email it to the entire board and to Dr. Jones, just so that while staff is working on all of these different issues, you'll have this list of questions, so either they could be incorporated in the presentation that we'll be receiving in the fall, or that they could be kind of an additional Q&A provided alongside. But just, I mean, the majority of my questions, I have 10 questions just on the K2, 3, 5 grade reconfiguration, 5 on magnet, which is somewhat related to the grade reconfiguration, I believe, 1 big one on redistricting, 3 on the Walter Fitzgerald ECC, and 4 on class size guidelines. Racial imbalance, I didn't really have any questions on because that's not quite the same as the rest of these, where I feel like I've been discussing racial imbalance for a really long time. But the grade reconfiguration, I had said back in March, I believe, when this came up, that I did have some questions both in terms of, you know, if we are to have only 2 schools be impacted or the entire district, just the rationale behind it, the cost savings, the educational benefits, districts that have done this and have been successful, districts that have done it have not been successful, the size of the districts. I know Weston has done it, but they're a much smaller district than us. And just also, if we chose to do a district-wide reconfiguration, how would that impact our middle school and high school feeder? Because right now, our middle schools, in terms of their capacities and enrollment, are pretty much where they should be for the most part, and our high schools are almost exactly split evenly in terms of enrollment. So I would just be concerned that if we went in that direction, how that would impact our middle and high school feeders as well. Also, just in terms of if we did a district-wide with 11 elementary schools, how would that work? Because I'd assume we'd kind of pair up the different schools. Would that create an orphan school? Would we be actually closing a school? Would there be that many classroom sections that we would save? In terms of class size guidelines, with McKinley being smaller class size guidelines as the rest of the district, how would that work? The CLC and CLCS programs, how would those work? So all of those things, and again, I have this all in writing, so I'm happy to put this in, and just hopefully these questions can be answered before the September 25th and October 23rd meetings, so that, you know, they'll be kind of within all the other information we'll be receiving at that time. And then questions about the magnet program in terms of IB. I know that that was mentioned. I know that there was a survey that went out to parents, and I think one refrain that I heard from a lot of the parents was that they didn't even know what an IB program was. So my thought would be, you know, in advance of any kind of discussion about an IB program, we should probably have some sort of a presentation to parents, you know, maybe one during the day and one at night, just to really share what this type of program is, and are there any other magnet programs we would look into, and then just trying to understand, you know, where this program would go, the costs, the savings, just how it would work in terms of if it's tied into racial imbalance or grade reconfiguration. And then I would just say, in terms of the redistricting, I disagree with the point that we need to have this discussion in this year before Mill Hill is approved as a project, because we don't know what the size of Mill Hill is going to be. So if we come up with a redistricting plan based on what we have in the ed specs right now, is Mill Hill being a 504, and for some reason it comes back at a smaller size, 378 or 441, because those are both in the bonding resolution, we would have to completely redo a redistricting plan. And in the meantime, we would be spending a tremendous amount of staff work and time, creating a tremendous amount of consternation with some neighborhoods that may end up not being impacted if Mill Hill isn't as big as we would like it to be. So that would be my concern, and I would just repeat, which I've said before, Burr did not have a redistricting plan, or the district did not have a redistricting plan when Burr was approved as a project, nor did Fairfield Woods. Those redistricting plans came in after the projects had been approved, so I just feel really strongly about that. It says in the memo we received, the lease site for Walter Fitzgerald is a source of concern for the Board of Ed. I personally was not aware of this, that it was a concern for the Board of Ed. I know I've visited the site, and I actually was very impressed with it, and I feel that, you know, Mrs. Donowitz is doing a really great job, and I'm just interested to hear what these concerns are. Also, just in terms of the ECC, I have some questions with that. And then class size guidelines, yes, I understand that this board has not discussed it, but I do have concerns about that as well. So again, I have this in writing, I will send it in, and you know, I really appreciate it if these questions could somehow be addressed when we get the presentations in the fall.
Mrs. Maxon Kennelly.
A few things. Mrs. Gerber certainly hit on a lot of my concerns, and Mrs. Gerber, you did offer at first in terms of not only sending it to Dr. Jones, but sending it to the board. I was not going to try to keep up with you, so I certainly think it'd be a great idea if it could be sent to the board as well, so that these are all things that we can think about. And I think it's very important what Mr. Dwyer said in terms of none of these are things that anyone on the board has spoken of as being a proponent for, but what all of us have asked for a few times is we need more information, because I don't want to make a knee-jerk reaction and say, no, I don't like the sound of this, even though I think it's a well-thought-out opinion, when I have no facts, no precedent, or other things to look at. And I think it's important that we consider them, not only for our sake as an educational body, but also for the purposes of the other town bodies, that they know we have thoughtfully had a conversation about this. So, and I do, to Mrs. Gerber's point, because at first she said she wanted the answers to these questions prior to the presentation, and then there at the end you said at the presentation. I would agree that I would hope that this would simply all be incorporated into the presentation, the answers to her questions as well as those of any other board members. I'm not interested in getting them before. I want that presentation to be what covers the material from the stance of the district. And I'm not sure, Mr. Dwyer, I'm taking you literally when you use the word motion, and I'm not sure if that's what you meant, because I know I would not be in favor of our putting a motion on this agenda to move these forward or not. If you're just talking about a sense of the body, that's why I wasn't sure if I was supposed to be taking that literally. At this point, I think our stance, my stance would be, the district has seen some merit in presenting a position to all of us. I'm open to hearing what the district has to say, because I don't want to reject something out of hand without having heard it. But I would not be in favor of putting a voting item on this agenda when the public, with many of whom will have had a fervent interest in this, might have wanted to come out to say, wait a minute, this was an up or down opportunity. I wouldn't be interested in putting that motion on the agenda, but simply to respond that I would look forward to September 25th, October 23rd, to really getting a fleshed out presentation on the pros, the cons, the educational benefit, and the financial impact of all of these. I'm willing to listen, and I also just want to strenuously support Mrs. Gerber's point that I have no interest in a redistricting conversation for this coming school year. I understand other town bodies might be interested in such a conversation, and I think this is where we're simply going to have to keep repeating ourselves that conversation is premature. And whoever is in the position of having to communicate that to them, keep repeating it. That's my position on that.
And that has been our position all throughout the Mill Hill vote. Because you addressed a question to me, the last time we talked about this, it was going to be a discussion item, and then there were some motions to take items off the agenda, take for further consideration. And this board, by a vote of 6 people, could say, I want to add something to the agenda and vote on it. So I only put it out there because I have to respect the fact that 6 members of this board could do that, and I was only wanting to give guidance on the proper way to do it if you were to have a sense of going down that direction. The second reason I mention that is that all 6 of these items will require a certain amount of staff research and thinking to answer these questions, which may be just the way they would answer the questions. And some of these questions, really the board might want to say, and here's how we think you should answer the questions. So how you get a staff answer and meld it in with a board answer and bring it to a final staff and board answer on these questions is a process. And if the board, and I'll use class size guidelines as the best example. If the board has no interest in going down the path of looking at those guidelines, which are essentially the administrative regulations of our board policy, they have no interest whatsoever. Why don't we just save the staff a lot of time and say, not a path we want to go down? And so I only picked that one because it's the most obvious one based on the last board's conversation and the passion that some people have toward it. And so if this board says, yeah, that's an ideal item to just knock off the list tonight, then the proper way to do it. So I only mention it for those two reasons. I, like yourself, do not like to take action when we haven't alerted the public that we may take action. Other comments that people have? Mrs. Jacobson.
Oh. Okay. I have to admit, in receiving your memo and seeing all of these items on one single page of paper was a lot. And so it struck me as I thought about this over the last week or so, or since we got the memo, that when I look at these items, there's so many lenses through which one could be viewing them from. Because the way that you look at the item through which lens really determines the questions you may have, the research you may require, the feelings you may have about it, or any impact you may feel that it has. So for me, I started categorizing these lenses in terms of these items, and whether they are an academic impact, educational value, whether it's a fiscal lens, is it a cost neutral? Is it a cost increase? Is it a cost savings? That's a different lens. Then there is implication on students, families, the logistical questions, the who, the what, the when, the why, the where, those kinds of questions. And what I began to realize is if I look at them all through all those lenses at the same time, it's just a round and round, and everything becomes very clear. So I've sort of applied, I know that tonight's conversation was a little bit how we want to approach each of these items. And so for me, I kind of started applying these an order of operations, if you will, and a math analogy, in other words. To me, you can't do the addition before you've done the multiplication. So I prioritized in my own mind, and I'm sure other people may have different priorities, but just given our charge of this board, and that our primary role is on educational value and the academic achievement of all of our students, my primary lens is going to be, in my approach and in my thinking, is does it add educational value and assist in increasing and improving upon our academic achievement. If it doesn't meet that first goal for me, it's probably not something I'm going to want to spend time looking at because it fits maybe another lens. So just sharing my thoughts and how I'm looking at all of this, and I know that a lot of these things, the questions that we have, are going to take a lot of staff time, but I also have just started doing my own. I've done a complete 5-year analysis on racial imbalance. I've done 5 hours of research on this K2-3-5 grade configuration model and looking at the summary of the literature on that. So certainly I have a lot of questions as well, just like I'm sure many other people do in terms of some of these topics, and so I'll just mention a few of those. And I'll just go in order. The grade reconfiguration, again, I'm coming back to educational value and impact on that. I'm looking at a review of the summary of the research on it, costs and savings, impact on staff, collaboration, curricular alignment, impact logistically on families and students, impact on the additional transition that we know that students may have with transitions even just from K to 6 and 8 to 9. This would be an additional one. Any impact on class sizes. Again, echoing Mrs. Gerber's question on McKinley class size or Jennings class size, just because those happen to be the two schools. Magnet program, again, other questions on just really a thorough analysis if there's any actual interest, particularly in our preschool families, because really they're going to be the market for this IB program, not students that we have currently necessarily. I agree that a presentation on if IB is the way that we think we would want to go on that, just a much better understanding of what IB is. Agree on Mill Hill. I think that the memo, you know, Mill Hill's going to come up next year, but again, any type of specific plan, I don't think that we're able to do without knowing the size of Mill Hill, so that would be an ongoing conversation. And just on and on. But class size guidelines, my feelings on that is I'm not really sure why it's on the list other than that's just my notes. But I hear what you're saying, Phil, that you wanted to give this board an opportunity to weigh on it. And my simple notes on class size guidelines is that I'm just not interested. Let's see, racial imbalance, you know, like I've said, I've done a lot of analysis on that on myself, but as far as I'm concerned, you know, right now we have a plan for racial imbalance. It is the plan. That's the plan. So until we decide if there's another way that this board would like to amend that plan, then that's my thinking on that we would have a discussion on an amendment to the plan as we would want to change it going forward. So those are just some of my initial thoughts, how I'm looking at it, and I'm happy to submit further questions to everyone else and Dr. Jones as well.
Okay. Mr. Asa.
So a lot's been covered already, but with regards to the magnet program, I have a question that I'm not sure if it can be answered now, Dr. Jones. But it's my understanding for a magnet program to work that it would involve grade reconfiguration or have to involve grade reconfiguration. Is that true, or could a school be designated as a K-5 magnet?
A school could be designated as a K-5 magnet, but part of that, it comes back to the decision points that this board has to make, in that, are you talking about a magnet school because you're trying to solve racial imbalance? That's the only reason this discussion has come up. And if it is to put a magnet school at McKinley, it will not solve racial imbalance. We don't have the seats available unless you're going to redistrict McKinley and move families out of there just to try to get more families to come in on a magnet. So, or is it just because the district wants to have a magnet school? So I think the board has to be able to answer that question. It's tied to racial imbalance. That's the only reason it's ever come up.
And I want to clarify, because there are two different terms that some board members are using interchangeably. Magnet school would mean that the neighborhood that currently is served by McKinley would be divided among the other 10 schools, and everybody in Fairfield would, by lottery, apply to be in the magnet school. That was never the intention of this board to go down that path. We've always used the term magnet program that might bring 50, 60, 70 students into that school that would then come from the other schools and change the ratio that's currently there. So the way to refer to it is a magnet program, and then decide what size magnet program, 30 students, 60 students, something like that, that would help us diversify that school.
Okay, that's helpful, because with a magnet program, it would be, we're talking about it being at McKinley, correct?
It has always been talked about from that perspective.
Okay, so how would we have room at McKinley for that? I'm just curious.
I would agree with Mrs. Jacobson. First, is an IB program helpful to the educational goals of this district? And once we get information on an IB program, and we say, yeah, this is something that we'd like to initiate, and then look at what school might be the best to put it at. And honestly, if you ask that question, there might be a different elementary school than McKinley that would have space to accommodate it without much change. But if you were saying we wanted a twofer, that we get the IB program, but we also have it help us with diversifying McKinley, then you'd say, yeah, then let's put it at McKinley and make room for it at McKinley in some fashion. So that's the, I think I would agree with Mrs. Jacobson. Do we see educational value to it? And if we don't, well, then we don't worry about the details. But if we do, then we move forward with some of the details.
Okay, so I'm not done. So being that it is tied to our racial imbalance plan that Mrs. Jacobson
Yeah.
says we have a plan, right? So it says we have a plan that's approved by the state and was voted on by the previous board. Investigating a magnet program is part of that. And if none of these initiatives resolve racial imbalance percentage, we would commit to a redistricting effort. So I think going to the comments that Mrs. Gerber and Mrs. Maxon Kennelly make, I agree with the fact that obviously we can't develop a redistricting plan. However, I think we do need to discuss if redistricting is going to be the option that we pursue if we are going to try and abide by this plan. Because if not, then I think this should be a topic for discussion about amending it, as Mrs. Jacobson says. Because right now, the way I look at it is if we're not solving the problem, then that's our kind of last resort. That's our fallback. Am I correct in that assumption with
I'll get to you. That's your last question, then I can go to Mrs. Pisco?
I don't know. It depends how you answer it. I'm not joking. It depends how you answer
I'm not
it.
joking. You're releasing the floor, so I'll decide who I'm going to go to.
Go for it.
Specifically, in front of the State Board of Education, I said, this board wants to explore all options and will only go to redistricting as a last resort. Secondly, that in spring of 19, we can tell you that every other option is off the table. We can't do it. So therefore, we will, quote, commit to redistricting. That does not mean we show them a redistricting plan in the spring of 2019. It just says the board has agreed once Mill Hill is opened and we have 504 seats there and we know that we're going to have them there, then we create a redistricting plan. And the state understands that we're not going to redistrict in the spring of 19 because they fully understand that they've been told and have accepted that we cannot redistrict without both Holland Hill and Mill Hill being at 24 classrooms or 504.
So I think based on you saying that, then I think we have to explore these other topics that are on this list to do our due diligence
Yes.
to the state. And therefore, we have to do it not because we're necessarily bent on this is what we have to do, but I think we have a duty to explore these things, and some may not be popular with the public. But I also, with regards to the redistricting, I agree that they're not going to expect a plan right then and there. But I'm curious, and maybe part of this discussion, if racial imbalance does make it onto a future agenda, is this board prepared to do that if we are faced with that last resort? Because if we're not, then we need to discuss some alternatives.
And if my statement about redistricting will be the last resort, and if this board says, no, it's not even a last resort, we will not do it, that puts more emphasis on the fact that we do have to find a different solution. Let me go to Ms. Pitko and then to Mrs. Maxon Kennelly.
I just add a point that's not listed on number 2. When we originally discussed the magnet program, one of the options we discussed was an innovative STEM or STEAM program. And I believe Mrs. Maxon Kennelly had used the example of an IB program that was in Greenwich. But I don't see it in here, and I'd like to include it because that is part of now what we're doing in the schools with STEM and STEAM.
Would that be considered another kind of magnet program?
Yes.
So we could, under magnet program, we could look at both alternatives, an IB or a STEAM program?
Yes.
Okay. Other comments? Mrs. Maxon Kennelly, yes, sorry.
Just to push back a little bit on Mr. Ace's timeline, as I believe, if I heard him correctly, the only conversations, my perception, that we are required to have at this board table are the ones that were on the timeline in the racial imbalance plan. And in fact, that would not involve any redistricting because we have said very clearly that redistricting is the last resort. And in fact, with the informal numbers that we have received thus at this point, McKinley actually took a tick in a favorable direction in terms of complying with the law. If the spring of next year, it took an additional tick in that direction, no, I don't think our back would be put to the wall for redistricting. I think our past practice has been, we are making progress, give us time to make more progress. So I just think that in terms of the conversations we need to have in terms of a good faith effort of staying true to that racial imbalance plan, we have to do and have the discussions that were stipulated in that racial imbalance plan, and no more, no less. I'm not saying not to have a robust conversation about it, because again, if we are moving in a favorable direction, and some of those timeline items might be ways to voluntarily continue that path of improvement, fine. But in fact, we don't need to, if right now we're moving in a good direction, that might continue, and that will very much change the view of the state towards us based on past practice. So just as a reminder about that.
Victor, do you have a comment on that thought? Can I follow up on a comment on that thought? Past boards since 2007 have said we're so close to the 25% measure. What can we do to just duck underneath it? So in 7 years, we ducked underneath it once. The other 6 years, we talked a way out of it with the State Board of Education. Maybe we can edit that phrase out of this tape. Members of the State Board of Education are getting very much exercised over this board's continual, can we just squeeze underneath? This board knows that there's another target, which is 15%, which says that you're impending racial imbalance. They only give you a requirement to have a plan if you get to the 25% or above. Their unwritten, unspoken kind of, we're hoping that you're going to get down to the 15 or slightly below that, so that we're not having to watch you every year or two, and you bump down by 2 points, you bump up by 2 points, and this continues to show up on our agenda every 2 years. That's the state's concern. And from time to time, this board, a minority of this board, has talked about what can we do that can get down to 16, 17% so that it doesn't show up on our agenda every 2 years? Or does this board want to continue the path of saying, let's just, the least disruption, let's just try and get slightly under the 25% and deal with it in 2 or 3 years? This board has gone back and forth on this. Admittedly, a minority of the board, I won't mention Paul's name, but was from time to time would say, well, why can't we solve this for a long time? And I think that's the question that is also before this board is what path do you want to take in regard to this? And of course, comprehensive redistricting would accomplish the down to 16, 17% or whatever the number is, and continuing to promote pre-K and a magnet program or other things would be more down the path of squeezing in. Ms. Pitko, I think you were next, Mrs. Jacobson and Mrs. Vitale.
I think the most pressing one on here right now is number 4. It literally says the ECC program has outgrown the Fairfield Ward High School site. I can't speak to the Walter Fitzgerald campus. I have been there. I'm not sure about the leasing, but I want to be clear. I have no desire to look at class size outside of to reduce it. So the fact that it's on this list is just disturbing to me.
I wrote the memo, so therefore let me try and explain the source of concern for the BOE. It is a leased facility. From time to time, we have had discussions with the landlord as to whether the landlord is maintaining the building the way we would like to maintain a school building, and we don't have control over doing some things at that building that we would do at all of our school buildings. And so it's more driven from that than anything else. I agree that the staff do a very good job of maintaining the school the best they can, delivering quality services, but from time to time it has been could we put this in a permanent space that we have better control over? So that is the perspective that I had when I wrote that phrase. Let's see, who's, that was Mrs. Jacobson.
All right, just piggybacking on a few things that were said back to first, Mr. Asa's point about, and getting to the magnet program, to your point also, Phil, is do we just believe that something has value and we want to look at it? In terms of Mr. Asa's space, I did run 10-year enrollment projections by elementary school and given them all an average number of seats based on their capacity and utilization, and McKinley is quite literally in place number 11 in terms of available capacity to house a magnet program. Burr came in first place. So that discussion is, do we value the magnet? Do we want to have it, at a place other than McKinley, or are we looking for that twofer, as it was stated before, in dealing with racial imbalance? And in terms of racial imbalance, to Mrs. Maxon Kennelly's point, we did have a favorable decline, and that was generally because most of our schools over time and with a one-year change have seen an increase in diversity rather than any change at McKinley, which remained flat. So just as a community, Fairfield is becoming more diverse. There are some pockets that is not necessarily the case, but generally speaking, if that trend were to continue, we could hope to see a continued improvement, or how would we change it? Less of an disparity there. And just to finally, question for the chair is, I know that we're talking about when, I'm just trying to get an idea of when we're going to actually make some of these decisions. Because I've heard September 25th, I know on our proposed schedule for next year, some of these topics come up in September 25th, and I'm just wondering when are you expecting for the board to actually have the conversation about some of our thoughts about these items, yes or no? Are we going to do them all together or separately? So I just have a kind of a logistical question on that.
When I looked at the dates, that would, in my mind, those were not decision dates. Like we're going to take a vote on it. That was, when will staff be ready to talk about it in enough detail so that the board can wrap their arms around it. And the board might have questions that go beyond what the staff were prepared for, and therefore as a board, we could say, okay, we're going to continue to explore this. Let's send this item to the policy committee because it's class size guidelines. Or let's send this issue to the finance committee because it's the ECC relocation and that's facility and whatnot. Or no, let's add this to the agenda of a full board meeting to talk about it among all of us. And so these were dates that I thought were getting us enough information to then be able to decide, move it forward or not, and in what fashion. So I was thinking of it more a process starting point than a ending point. Dr. Jones, did you have any comments regarding that?
Just that one item? I have
About-
several.
About the dates and what you would be ready for.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I had written down in here, I have a couple comments on several things, but the calendar that was presented, I didn't feel like was received from the board, that's what the board wanted to do. So I'm not looking at it from having a presentation in September or October from just staff if that calendar was not well received, because that's one of the items that we have on here where we talked about like those business meetings or whatever you wanted to call them. If that is not the direction we're going, and that was my understanding, then we need to reset all of those dates, because if all of the work is going to fall on staff or consultants, I need to go back in and look at the entire calendar. So I wanted to clarify that, because that's what I took away from the last meeting, and that you were going to actually email the chair with some ideas, and we didn't reset the calendar because I don't think we got any new ideas. And correct me if I'm wrong, maybe we did, but on how to reset the calendar. But we don't have a new calendar for next year. That looks different, where we don't have those working groups to help.
So just
I added the dates of what were on the last calendar, but I am counting on people today, and there has been some communication from people, and that communication was, well, we'll bring those ideas to the table. And so of those who had those thoughts as to, if not these dates, what dates, and what has to get accomplished by the board and the staff to be ready for whatever that date is, speak now or speak later. Mrs. Vitale. Oh, wait a second.
Well, yeah, I'm just following up. So if you don't think that September 25th is feasible, do you have an idea of when?
I really, to me, and I'm going to be very honest, I feel like we're having the same discussion for the fourth time as a board that we've had since last October, before this new board even started. And we keep talking about we need to plan going forward, but we're not actually making the decision about how we're going to do that. And so what I presented at the last board meeting was just a different plan or a way to do that. And I'm going to use this as an example. With the Finance Committee, when they wanted to look at going paperless, we were able to have, Meg involved when they were there. We were able to bring that same consultant. They were able to weigh in. So at tonight's meeting, they were able to have a voice and be well informed. It wasn't all on staff just saying we want to go paperless. And that mentality seemed to be the way the board was thinking they wanted to go. So when I presented that really was about having, 3 members or so being able to make sure we're working together with staff. And if that's not the direction we're going, that's what I heard at the last meeting, I need to go back in and kind of look at the calendar and what is manageable just for staff, if it's really a staff presentation. But you want me to go ahead and make a couple other comments that may feed into that, or?
Yes, please do.
Okay, because, and here's another question, that I had. When we talk about the presentation in September or October for K1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think the question that I have for the board, are you proposing district-wide K2, 3, 5? Because staff have never presented that. Malone and McBroom didn't present that. They talked about a McKinley and Jennings combination, which was very unique because they were asked for structural change, efficiency, and also for racial imbalance. But if the board is asking us to explore that, I need the board to say that, because that has never been a recommendation. And quite frankly, and we talked about it at the Finance Committee, I think that would be a long haul in this community to go K2, 3, 5. Doesn't mean we can't explore it. It's a difficult discussion. But we also are going to need about $20,000, $25,000 to explore that, if we're going to do it right and bring you good information, because somebody has to look at all of the enrollment across the district. How can you pair schools? What do the projections say? And that's a very different question than the McKinley and Jennings K2, 3, 5.
You had a series of things you wanted to say?
Yeah, I have a couple more. When we talk about the redistricting, the board, again, and it's the prior board, but in our racial imbalance, and maybe we need to send that out again, we did commit to talk about redistricting. And I think that is in there. That's the last item. I'm going to have to stand in front of the state board and be able to say that we had the discussion. I don't think they're asking for what addresses or neighborhoods. It's basically looking at, okay, we've talked about K1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for McKinley, Jennings to solve it. No, that's not in the direction we want to go, or maybe it is. But if it's not, we're kind of going through that series of steps and able to say to the state board, we're going to be thinking about doing the big clockwork, which goes back to what we talked about in 2016, or no, we don't want whole district upheaval. We want to look at more pockets. That's really the discussion I think that we have to get to by the end of 2019 for us to stand in front of the state board and say we've done exactly what they intended for us to do. And I do think we're in a little bit different place than we were the previous decade, because they are frustrated with us. And they do have one line, and I've said this to some of you, that was put in the budget in the fall, where it talks about construction funding and racial imbalance. That has never been in there before. So at some point, are they going to come back and say, we're not going to reimburse this town for all of these construction projects that we have going if we're not complying? I think they've looked for a mechanism for years because they know they don't really have the authority to necessarily make us comply. So I think that is a concern. On the Walter Fitzgerald, I think it's just making sure, just to reiterate what Mr. Dwyer was saying, that building, we don't have the capacity, well, I should say we haven't had the will, I think, to invest in a building that we don't own. And the board may decide differently. Maybe that's something that we're going to have a long-term lease and we're going to invest in property we don't own. And that is part of that discussion. But right now, we're not investing in it, and those students do not have an equitable facility to our other students in the district, and it is a concern going forward. And then on the magnet, I'll just that was one of the last, is that the magnet idea was out of the racial imbalance. It was doing a survey. We didn't do a high-level scientific survey. It was just, is there even any interest? Quite frankly, I was surprised that 70, I think it's like 70-odd% said they'd be interested in a steam magnet. I thought it would be, we have no interest, because that was one of the answers. I just thought overwhelmingly most people would say they just didn't have an interest at all. We know if we're going to go in that direction, we need community input, we need a lot of work has to be done. But if we're not doing it for racial imbalance, are we just doing it for educational quality because we think it would be great for Fairfield to have a magnet? Again, that's a different question than what we started out with last fall. So if we're going to go in that direction, I think for the staff, we need to know that the board is actually wanting just to explore a magnet just because we think it has great educational quality.
Now, I think my order was I had Mrs. Maxon Kennelly, Mrs. Vitale, and Ms. Leeper were in that order.
I just wanted to piggyback on something.
Well, wait, I have to ask permission. Wait a second, Jessica Gerber. Did somebody else raise their hand?
I had
You did. Okay. So, Mrs. Maxon Kennelly, do you want to make comments or defer to Mrs. Gerber to follow up on Dr. Jones's comment?
I'm following up, but I'm willing to defer and
Mrs. Gerber.
Well, just two things. First, my question about the redistricting was based on the comment in this memo that says, as part of the Mill Hill discussion, this topic will need to be addressed during the 18-19 school year. So my concerns with discussing redistricting, as I stated in my question, had everything to do with the fact that it was joined with the Mill Hill discussion, which, as I said, I feel is really difficult and not impossible to do because we don't know the size of Mill Hill. As far as the magnet program goes, one of the reasons why I ask questions and others have asked questions about it is because it has been specifically referenced in terms of the Jennings-McKinley K235 program. It was mentioned to the Jennings community that this was an idea, that the program could pay for itself or come close to paying for itself through the grade reconfiguration. So that's why I had questions, and it's right here in this memo. So I just wanted to clarify those questions that I had.
Yeah, just to clarify, the redistricting as part of the Mill Hill, again, I wrote the memo. For those of you who have shown up at the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance to advocate for Mill Hill, as much as we say we're not going to talk about that until after you decide about the size, they want to talk about it now. And so this just is a reminder to us that no matter what we say, they will want us to talk about it. We'll have to continue to give that message, but I think it would be better if the board consistently said, based on our last time we talked about it, which was last June or in October, that we are firmly believing that we cannot give you an answer until you make a decision on the size of the school. So it's only from that perspective that, unfortunately, we've tried to convince the other town bodies to stop asking the question, but they still do. Mrs. Maxon Kennelly, I think you were next.
2 points. First of all, to follow up on the redistricting discussion, it is, of course, I do think a significant difference to your point, Mr. Dwyer, where I think we should simply keep reiterating we're not going to have that discussion. But I am sensitive to Dr. Jones's point, which was, quite separate. I see that as being a much later in the spring discussion when we have a new set of numbers. But that is a very different discussion that does not involve mention of neighborhoods, that does involve intent of the board, that also will have come after we've learned more about some of these other voluntary options. So I do think that's a fair point, that might be something we come up with, but that's a conversation held very differently. So thank you for that reminder. Regarding the idea of this board asking for the K235 reconfiguration, I would be willing, speaking solely for myself, to say, okay, let's hear about it with just 2 schools, but it's with the idea that if the educational benefits of this are that tremendous and that creative and that inspiring, then I think there's the possibility this board would have the conversation then of a consultant of, no, this is so worthwhile, we want to see this district-wide. On the other hand, if the staff can do its own to do the work just for those 2 schools, and we can hear about all of these benefits, then we can make the decision. We'll have that only there. Again, I think we were very much of the mind that if this is such a valuable idea, why isn't it being done? But I think that for September, speaking for myself, I would be fine with not investing $25,000 in a consultant to hear how that would work district-wide. Let's hear about it, and even without using the names of 2 specific schools, just, what does that look like? 2 schools having this, how does it save on money? And most importantly, how would this be something that would be educationally something that the other schools would be saying, why can't we have that? So I would just, again, speaking for myself, I'd be fine with saving the $25,000. Let's hear about it for 2, and then the board would have the discussion of, we're sold, let's go beyond that. I mean, right now, I just think I can't say more than that, because I hear what you're saying. It's a little bit of chicken and the egg of, you're looking for more direction, and we're being asked to make a decision about something that we know nothing about. And I don't want to just assume that what happened in one district worked or didn't work. I don't know enough about it, and that's what I'm looking to get information for, to make a decision.
Mrs. Vitale. Did you raise your hand?
Losing track of my original when I first raised my hand, like
Yeah,
10
I'm
minutes
trying to
ago.
go in the order that people originally raised their hand.
I guess redistricting first. I mean, it is in the racial imbalance plan for a discussion, redistricting elementary schools in Fairfield, survey the community on redistricting options, June 2018. So while I absolutely agree we should not be looking at maps, neighborhood maps, I think that we as a community need to be more open to saying redistricting, because for years we were afraid to say the word. And Mrs. Gerber brings up the middle school feeder pattern. We didn't have a plan in place when that renovation was approved, and then all of a sudden we needed to fill those seats. And we were rushing to do a redistricting plan. The feeder plan happened over the summer. The community really wasn't involved because it was the summer. They came back in September, and everyone was up in arms like, what happened? Why didn't we know? So I think the sooner that we talk about it as a possibility, I think that if most people would want it to be a last resort, I think the better. Just so the community feels that they're part of the conversation from the start. We're being as transparent as possible, and maybe are open to other possibilities. So I agree with you and you in terms of that. And Mr. Dwyer, in terms of, other town bodies, we don't need to have a redistricting plan, but I think that it behooves us to say that we are planning to possibly redistrict to fix numerous problems. Racial imbalance being one of them. We haven't even talked about facilities utilization at some of our schools, which redistricting might also help. We're going before town bodies saying that we need more elementary school space because we have these issues. Again, with the chicken and the egg, I feel like the redistricting conversation is that as well. What size school do we need? Well, how many kids are going to be there? Well, we can't tell you how many kids are going to be there until we know what size school. So we're going around in circles. I think the more upfront we are about it, that we have numerous issues that are separate, yet all need to fit together at the end, the better. And I really, to get back to the document that we got from Dr. Jones at our last meeting, a lot of questions just came up and how this board is going to direct staff. I'm not sure that having them as agenda items is really going to get the job done. We brought up the special meetings the day that we passed the budget. It was the same day we passed our budget, and then we agreed to do special meetings for facilities. They never really quite got off the road, that I think the way that we wanted them to be a committee of the whole to discuss these issues. And I think that we need to kind of decide as a board if the working meetings are not going to work, where I think there's some appreciation why we like that kind of format, but our bylaws don't allow them. We need to kind of come up with an idea of how we're going to move forward. And if that means holding a special meeting in the fall, then maybe we should just look at our calendars now instead of trying to throw a date on the calendar within the next 2 weeks and have some board discussions about this. And in terms of the working meetings, let it be a special meeting, and whether or not it needs to be in this format, or if we can just have a public meeting sitting around a board table, change the format to have a more free flow of ideas, maybe that's something that we can explore as a board. That's it. I'll defer to somebody else for that.
It is my hope that the board tonight will say, what process do we want to go forward with so that we can give direction to staff. I like the idea of all 9 board members in a, I call it a special meeting because the state only recognizes 2 terms, regular meeting and special meeting. Whether we call it a business meeting, a working meeting, we can call it whatever we want locally, but from the perspective of notice period, it is always considered a special meeting, and it's open to the public, and our bylaws say that we don't take public comment at those meetings, but our bylaws also give the chair an opportunity to adjust that bylaw if it's in the best interest of the board. So there's some flexibility on those kind of meetings. Where was I? Ms. Leeper. Did you want to follow up
Just
on
one
that?
more about, and I think just to, some of the boards, to Dr. Jones's point of not really being in favor of the working committees, I think it was more a concern about not giving the public notice or not having working meetings that weren't noticed to the public. There was, at least for myself, needed some more clarity on exactly how that would work, what the logistics would be. If you met with only a few board members, would we have to form ad hoc committees? Could we have just working business meetings? Would there be an agenda? Would they be noticed? And how would that move forward? And if there may be, for some of these topics, maybe other board members would be interested in participating in those conversations as opposed to the ones that were suggested on the memo.
I know there was confusion on that, but whether we break down into groups of 3 or 4 or 5 or a group of a whole, we would have to notice the public about the meeting and have an agenda, very much like any agenda, and be able to say, here's the topic that's under consideration. That I don't think there was any proposal that was suggesting that there would be little groups that meet off to the side and the public would not know. So whatever the size and whatever you call it, it would be a special meeting to be noticed to the public, and a formal agenda, informal minutes.
Okay, I did misunderstand. I thought it sounded much more informal, that Dr. Jones would be, just meeting in the public, and that it wouldn't be as formal of a setup when first presented.
Special meetings only say you open, you talk about the
Well,
topic.
for a special
and you
meeting,
adjourn.
but for like, on this, to discuss, say, the ECC and Walter Fitzgerald.
Yeah.
That would be a special meeting?
Yes.
But of only 3 members of the board, or the full board? You could have a special meeting with only a smaller,
Yes, if this
Okay.
board could decide, yes, let's break down into 3-person committees, and those people would represent the board on that topic, or we could go with a special meeting of all 9 board members. It's really up to the board to decide how they want to tackle these issues.
so we wouldn't have to form ad hoc committees. We could just have a special meeting with less than the full board if need be. All right.
Ms. Leeper. And then it was Mrs. Jacobson, Mr. Acer, and Ms. Pitko.
I'm not exactly sure how to start, but I agree with Dr. Jones that this is like the 4th time we've discussed this, and I had written down before Mrs. Maxon-Kennelly said it, a bit of a chicken and egg scenario where I think you're waiting for guidance from us, and we've been sort of waiting on guidance from you. And I know back at the March 19th meeting, when we kind of checked some things off the list, I had asked, sort of what your thoughts were on those things we were checking off the list, because I hate the idea that maybe we checked some things off the list that you actually think were the solutions that now we're not exploring, and instead we're exploring these other things that maybe aren't part of your vision for the right path to be going, or the best path to be going. But that aside, Ms. Vitalia, Ms. Jacobson, and I put together some specifics, and I'm happy to just kind of go through them for logistics with the calendar, because I think that's sort of now what you're wondering. So now where do we go? How should you be scheduling staff time to tackle these issues, and what is our expectation? Because even now that we're having this conversation, I'm not sure that we've necessarily given you much that's tangible to go forward with from here. So I'm happy to just sort of give some proposals.
You have the floor.
That large topic shouldn't be discussed in informal working sessions, but sort of noticed in public. The Finance Committee can continue to do the work on grade reconfiguration, however we want to structure that initially, because I agree we don't necessarily want to spend $35,000 to hire a consultant to look at what it will look like for the full district, which we discussed after the last Finance Committee, but to kind of get the microcosm of how much saving is this? Could that savings be generalized if we did this district-wide, or is this sort of specific to that type of scenario? And then again, what are the educational benefits and value there? And I will also say that the Finance Committee, I feel like, is also having a bit of a chicken and an egg, where we're expected to discuss only finance topics, but also not explore topics that we don't think have educational value. So if the full board wants to provide some guidance to that as well, I, as chair, would really appreciate that, because I certainly don't want to be tackling topics that the full board thinks should be before the 9 of us. I have no, specific sort of ego about the Finance Committee doing this, that, or the other. The purpose is to benefit the board and Dr. Jones and central office, and be more efficient use of time. So if people want to sort of think about that also, I'd welcome feedback. So that the Finance Committee could continue to work on grade reconfiguration scenario and adding a magnet, and specifically an IB. And one proposal is that there could be a public forum to discuss the idea of magnets and provide more education on what International Baccalaureate is, because I think we talk about IB a lot, and I'm sure 99% of people who watch our meetings have no idea what IB is when we keep saying it, and what the value of that would be. And then Dr. Jones had put on one of the agenda items, racial imbalance, impact, and noncompliance, and we thought that should be discussed by the full board, and also maybe a community town hall dedicated to the facilities utilization and effects of facility utilization on racial imbalance, because that is currently a part of our racial imbalance plan. The full board could discuss the ECC and Walter Fitzgerald, and we asked if we could schedule tours before that, because I know I would love a tour of both of those facilities as someone who doesn't yet have children in the schools. And then also special meeting for the full board to discuss facilities utilization and preparation for the Mill Hill capital requests. So that's sort of a lot, but I'm hoping could be somewhat more tangible of actual structure for meetings. Just one proposal.
Mrs. Jacobson's next.
I think I forgot what I wanted to say, but just jumping out at me right now since the last round of conversation is that I'm very hesitant of having the board break into small groups working siloed on some of these topics without everyone there, and to be able to hear and participate and to share their thoughts on those items. I would prefer that something like that, these bigger items, remain as a committee of the whole. That is not to say, though, because I'm sensitive to Dr. Jones' point, that if we expect staff to do all this research on all of these topics, we could be here next year and still be talking about some of these things. So I don't know about anyone else, but I have been and have done comfortable doing my own research. So I'm just curious if others may not feel that they're comfortable doing their own research on things like grade configuration or class size or magnet programs, that we can maybe do our own, or maybe some people can do research on things that they may be more interested in and then share that with other board members, so that this is not entirely falling on staff. I certainly am happy to meet with Dr. Jones or anyone on what I have done thus far. So that's one idea about the approach on this, is that we just take the initiative ourselves to do some of this work. But I also am frustrated that we really have not gotten to a place of a structure for these conversations yet. So I agree with the chair that hopefully by the end of tonight we will. What else was I going to say? I think that's it right now. But I just wanted to share that I think that we should stay at the committee of the whole, and that maybe we can do some of our own work and share that with each other going forward. But that's it for now.
Can I just make one comment on Mrs. Jacobson's comment? All board members do their own research all board members play with numbers, and they come up with a conclusion based on those numbers. And every once in a while, I'll use Mrs. Munsell's name, every once in a while, Mrs. Munsell will check our math and say, well, no, you didn't quite get it right. And so anytime board members do their own research, I strongly encourage you to pass that research through the staff so that we don't have 3 board members with 3 different versions of what these numbers mean, and they're all in the same ballpark, but they're slightly different. I think once you do the math, check it with staff so that you can kind of say, yes, this matches the district's official records, so the board has a single set of facts to deal with. Mr. Asa.
So a couple things. Dr. Jones, with regards to the grade reconfiguration, and I agree with you, this topic has been discussed several times, but the way I take things is slightly different, because from what I heard from board members was that they wanted more information because if this were something to explore, it should be a district-wide thing. And I'm going back months, not tonight. And that being said, I have no plan or intention at all of the state of Connecticut Board of Education telling the town of Fairfield that we need to solve racial imbalance by combining 2 schools. I don't think it's appropriate. I don't think it's right. And I think we need...
I appreciate your enthusiasm, but you've been very good in listening so far. I'd encourage
Don't get
you
me
to
in
continue
trouble.
to do that.
And I just have a problem at the core fundamentally with this, not necessarily the idea. That being said, if you came to us and said you want to explore grade reconfiguration for the educational merit and value to begin with, that would be one thing. But what this happened was this came to us as a potential solution for racial imbalance. That alone, to me, makes it invalid. I'm speaking for myself, not anyone else. And I think we don't need to waste our time looking further at this, because I think we have other things on here that we need to focus on, including facility utilization and other hot topics. And I personally, at this point, to answer your question, you want direction? I'll give you direction. I want to make a motion to add to the agenda. However I have to do this, please advise, Mr. Chair, but I want to get this off the table.
You're very good, thank you. So here's the question I would ask you. Is a K2-3-5 district-wide a topic of conversation you'd be willing to consider, or you want to take off the table the specific recommendation of the consultant who was asked what's some of the options for racial imbalance, and this was one of them they came up with? Which
I'm
direction are
not
you
saying
heading
that I would never want to ever want to consider the idea of it. I don't want to waste our time with it now, because
So I would suggest if you wanted to make a motion to say that if, when we consider K2-3-5, we consider it only as a district-wide option. And that might be a positive way of saying, I'm willing to talk about it, but only from that perspective.
Okay.
That would
because
give the 2 schools who have been most frequently mentioned, I think, some comfort that they know that that's off the table.
Yeah, and I don't want to spend $25,000 to look at it, quite honestly.
But what I thought I heard some board members saying is that without going into the details of how it would be implemented, can we at least have a presentation on the educational value that might accrue to a K2-3-5 system?
So let me ask the question, is that possible without a consultant study, Dr. Jones?
I'll ask Dr. Jones that.
I can answer that right now. There is no difference in educational quality in K-5, K-1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It is what a community really buys into. It is what a board wants to do. You're not going to, you can do lots of pros and cons, and it's opinion-based. And you have school systems that are K-1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they wouldn't have it any other way. You have systems that are K-5, that are K-6. you're not going to be able to make a decision on educational quality. They both have value, they both have pros, and they both have cons. You know, there are people who are in K-1-2 settings that you could not pull them away from their schools because that early childhood haven with all the little people and they're not around big kids is actually a really beautiful thing. And then there are school districts where K-5, they love the buddies with K and 5 and pairing up. And I will say from our senior team, I know Mr. Cummings is not here at the moment, but he was in a district that changed to K-1-2, you know, 3, 4, 5. They changed back. Mr. Mancusi went through that in his previous district. They still are in that model. I've been in districts where we've had K-1-2, 3, 4, 5. It all depends on the community, and I could give you a list of pros and cons for both. It comes down to it's a community decision, and if it's not palatable, and we don't think that in this community, our 11 elementary schools are going to be able to support a vision, and the board doesn't really have the will to go through that, then why discuss it? Because all it does is stress everybody out. And so, I mean, the board has to know, we've got a small group here tonight for K-1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for 2 buildings. Do that on 11, we're gonna have to be in a huge, big auditorium. So we just need to know it's a big discussion. If the board wants to have it, we can for cost savings, but you're not gonna get a difference in the educational quality from an educator standpoint.
So that being said,
So,
bear with me 1 second.
so the other advice I would give you is save your motion, let's finish our discussion, and then we'll decide what things we want to have as motions and do them all at once. Is that a fair thing?
If that's what the other board members want to do. But I just think we should just get this on the, and discuss this now, because it's one of the things we're going to have to discuss it anyways, so.
True.
I'd like to, can I make my motion?
Please do if you want to.
So I'd like to make a motion to remove the option to grade split McKinley and Jennings to solve racial imbalance.
Ms. Pitko seconds. Do you have the motion as he read it?
Do you have to make a motion to add an item to the agenda first?
Yeah.
Yes.
Can you redo that? Then
Okay.
we'll go through the process of adding it, and then we'll
So I-
consider your motion.
So
at
I
least we
would,
can get it down.
I would like to make a motion to add an item to the agenda.
Okay. The motion to add an item to the agenda considering K235 grade reconfiguration is on the agenda. Ms. Pitko seconds it. Any discussion on that? It requires 6 votes. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, let me slow down. Do you understand the motion as it's in front of you? This is to add an item to the agenda. It's not to debate the item, it's just, this is a motion that's gonna go on the table, and then once the board decides to add the item to the agenda, then the motion to actually do what Mr. Asa wants to do will be put on the table, and then you can debate that. So, with that, does everybody understand the process? So how many want to?
Just to clarify, the motion is to add an item to the agenda, period. Okay, because you added some additional words that I just wrote down, but we're saying,
Well, we have to describe what the agenda item is.
okay, so you do want me to add the additional language?
To add the K235 grade configuration to the agenda as an action item. You know, you can't just say, let's add something to the agenda without just saying what it is that you're adding. So, again, 6 votes in order to add the topic to our agenda. So all in favor, please raise your hands. Ms. Pitko? Ms. Jacobson? Mr. Asa? Your hands are... Mr. Peterson, 1, 2, 3, 4. Opposed? Ms. Leeper, Mrs. Vitale, Mrs. Gerber, Mr. Dwyer, Mrs. Maxon Kennelly. It fails. Okay?
4-5.
4-5. So, thank you, Mr. Asa.
Thank you.
We're at Ms. Pitko.
Did you want to follow up with that? Or, okay, it's up to you.
Ms. Pitko, Mrs. Gerber, did you have your hand up as well?
Wow, I don't even know where to start. Okay, I'm going to reiterate what I've been saying for well over a year. When the racial imbalance plan was presented to us, my understanding was that we were to look at a possible magnet program redistricting to solve the issue. We hired the consultants. The consultants came in, gave us 6 proposals, and one of them was grade configuration. I vetted the questions to McClellan McBroom, and I said at that meeting, I didn't like any of the 6. I've never changed the way I felt about that. I understand there's some misunderstanding about how maybe the board felt and looking at some of these. I'm not ready to make a motion. I'm sure other people have conversation they want to have, but I just want to make it clear how I feel about this. On the previous board that I was on, because I've been here for 3 years, we did have a redistricting ad hoc committee, and we said we wanted to stay in our neighborhood schools. I don't know if you guys heard that. I just want to reiterate that.
Ms. Pitko is right. This board has consistently said we really don't want to go down the path of redistricting. As the facility utilization issues became bigger and bigger, there was revised conversation about it. And what one board decided doesn't bind a future board. And so a future board could very well say, no, we talked about it for about 15 minutes, we agree with the prior board, we're done. So putting it on the table is not advocating for it, it's just saying, let's make sure the current board is in the same place. Let's see, do you mind if I still go in order? Mrs. Gerber.
Okay. Well, 2 things. First, just to reiterate what a few board members have said, I don't think that we should have smaller groups on the board having these discussions. We already have the Finance Committee, which is doing its work, but if we start doing more groups, and it was my understanding that it was creating problems with staff time to have more committees. So, but these are large, important discussions that all 9 members of the board need to have, and I feel we would just be adding an extra level if we have additional committees discussing specific issues. These are all issues that will eventually have to come to the board anyway. They're issues that the public are going to be interested in. They're going to come to the meetings or going to watch them on Fair TV, and so I believe that the entire board needs to weigh in and have these discussions, and if we have to have additional special meetings, so be it. If we can incorporate some of the discussions into our regular meetings, that would also work. But I would also just say, in terms of the grade reconfiguration, the reason why I did not vote in favor of that is because we have been asking for months for information. At the March 19th meeting, I was just looking at the minutes, and multiple board members said that they would like to have more information. I think we're all very aware of the fact that other town bodies are looking to us to make difficult decisions or at least vet things out. So just because we haven't received the information on a K235 Jennings-McKinley program does not mean that we should just not support it. I personally, and I have told people this, and I will continue to say this, I do not like to have any 1 or 2 schools singled out. However, I want us to be able to say to the other town bodies and anyone who asks that we did our due diligence, that we asked for information, we received it, we discussed it, and then we moved on. So I would sincerely hope that we can get this information that we have requested and that we can have a discussion. And since we've had so many discussions already, hopefully it will be fairly brief. Or maybe we'll read the information and say we don't even need to have a discussion. Let's move it off. But we have questions just in terms of the logistics. How would this work for any 2 schools? And I would really, really appreciate it if we could get that information that was requested back at our March 19th meeting and to be able to have a discussion and check it off.
Mrs. Maxon Cannelli is next.
I'm piggybacking on Mrs. Gerber's comments. And to Mrs. Picco's point that never liked any of this, Mr. Dwyer started this conversation an hour and a half ago, I think, capturing all of our views from the jump, which was none of us are proponents, aggressive, active proponents of any of these ideas. I think we have a great school system. I liked what we have. I'm happy in many regards with certain aspects of the status quo, and our budget is addressing aspects that need improvement. But if an idea is brought to us by district leadership and combined with the request of other town bodies for us to have conversations and examine things, I think for a thoughtful conversation needs to take place, and it is not a thoughtful conversation done in the vacuum of information. Number one. And number two, I wanted to be consistent with what I said at the jump. I don't believe adding a motion for this agenda was appropriate. We had no notice of that to the public. There was no notice. For all we know, there could be people who are in favor of this. You know what? This would be a better option than a district-wide redistricting. I don't know what the argument would be, but no one was on any kind of notice to hear it. And I guess, obviously, every board member is allowed to act how they please, but the one time that we did this was with Sherman. It was with the very specific point that we as a board thought we had already eliminated something off the list. That is not what this is. Again, I have yet to hear a very strong argument in favor of this, and I am swayed by Mr. Ace's point that if this solely is for racial imbalance, I would be hard-pressed to support it, but I'm willing to listen to staff and to leadership make a point about it. And if we're not willing to listen, we open ourselves up to anyone who wants to say they just won't do anything different, they won't even consider it. When you won't hear the facts or the arguments, that is exactly where you've put the whole board. So just to be consistent, Sherman was an exception. There is no notice of this to anybody in the public that this would happen. In fact, I know the people who asked me about it, I said explicitly this would not be a voting item tonight because I thought this was solely discussion. I thought this came with a process. September 25th would be a discussion. October 23rd would be a discussion that would be fact-based, that would be well thought out. So I don't like being in the position of voting against that motion. I don't, because it is in no way an indication of what I'm thinking. It is only an indication that I'm open to hearing the discussion, and then we can make a thoughtful decision. And to the earlier point about us doing our homework, I don't like the idea of us off doing 9 different things. We are volunteers here. We have staff who have many of their own connections, many of their own experience, and do their own research. I don't like the idea that I'm painted as somebody or hinted at as somebody who, well, you need to do more of your own homework and then you could have made a decision tonight. I find that very objectionable. I'll just say that. But again, my vote tonight had nothing to do with being in favor of this plan. It had everything to do with us being what I hope is a thoughtful board.
Thank you. Mrs. Vitale.
I was just actually going to echo Ms. Maxon-Canelli's point of this wasn't noticed. It's a very important topic. I think it's important that the public has a chance to come and weigh in on it. Also, as a point of clarification, the last scenarios from Malone and McBroom were not for racial imbalance. They were for structural change. So it was the operational effectiveness. And I know that racial imbalance came, and else we were misled in terms of that, but I thought they were coming to us to help with scenarios to help us save money. And in looking at possible structural changes that might provide a cost benefit, also to look at the racial imbalance, because we did have a racial imbalance plan. And to Ms. Pitko's point of the about the redistricting committee, those guiding principles that committee came up with and that the previous board approved were the guiding principles for the current racial imbalance plan. So, talking about redistricting and some of the plans that are out there were not done without community input in the past. There could have been different plans out there if we were willing to not try to maintain neighborhood schools, not try to maintain the feeder pattern. So again, just to try to, not that I'm a proponent of redistricting at all, but I think that we just need to be thoughtful in our approach and our discussion and just kind of keep it in context of how we got to this point a little bit.
Let me ask a couple of specific questions. Myself, Mrs. Jacobson, and Mrs. Gerber have commented that whatever we do, we ought to do as a group of 9 to start with. And maybe when we get to the finer details, we might say, yeah, you 3 get together and we'll massage the finer details. But in order to prioritize what we're going to go forward on, we ought to do that as a group of 9. Are there other board members who are feeling that same way? Mrs. Vitale? Okay, so let's say we've decided one thing, we will either on regular agenda items or special meeting agendas, put these items on in some
Can I just ask you to
logical
clarify? So basically, you're saying a special meeting of 9?
fashion. A
Yes.
special meeting of the
Yes.
entire board, yes.
Yes.
Correct. Special meeting of the entire board. And it's called a special meeting because it hasn't already been posted last January. So every meeting that is scheduled beyond a regular meeting is always called, per state rules, a special meeting. And we'll look at the agenda and see if we can't move things around so that we could actually carve it out and tackle an issue with the amount of time that we've dedicated to tonight to a topic. And if we can't, because of the press of other business, well, then we'll have to call a special meeting. Number two, even though we've not taken a vote, it strikes me that this board has no interest in looking at a K-2-3-5 system that is only involving 2 schools. It doesn't strike me that the board has any appetite to go down that path, that they're willing to look at that as a system that, the last time I looked at it 3-4 years ago, maybe it saves 10 sections. One time I looked at it, it was going to save 12 sections. At the average cost all in of a teacher, that's $1.2 million. If it has similar education value, would the community say, that's money that can get reinvested in other program improvements, not to just drop it to the bottom line, because I don't think any of us want to take savings and drop it to the bottom line. But is that something that we could use to reinvest in some other new program initiative? That, I think, is what some board members are saying. We'd like to see what that's about and compare and contrast that with a magnet program, or compare and contrast that with the impact of redistricting. When it comes to redistricting, this board has consistently said, using the favorite term, that we don't want to pocket redistrict. But if you were faced with the prospect, I'll back up and say, although I hear from time to time people in the community, I've not heard any board, past or present, say, let's just tell the state we're not going to comply with the regulation around racial imbalance, so sue us. I've not heard the majority of this board or past board saying, that's the stance we're going to take. So if I'm misreading this board, and you say, no, I don't want to look at any items, let's just make them take us to court, well, that's a whole different conversation. But at the moment, I'm presuming that this board wants to find some way to comply.
You're saying the majority of the board?
The majority of this board, correct. And so give me a hint somehow, hit me up the side of the head with a 2x4 and say there are 4 other people other than one board member who might be willing to go down that path. And so therefore, if all of these ideas you just don't like, as Dr. Jones mentioned, there's educational value in any system you want. What's the community comfortable with and what do they want to pursue? And if K-2-3-5 saves us money, we get the same educational value, and we build less classrooms over the long term. Let's look at it. But if you say, no, that's too much of a change for this community, we're not going to look at that. And we don't want to look at comprehensive redistricting, moving what that clockwork thing was, about 80 students just clockwise around, that rebalances from a facility utilization point of view our facilities. Well, pretty soon when you start saying no to things, then you're left with the option that these boards have generally said is, how do we squeeze in underneath the 25%? And then you're talking about, quote, pocket redistricting to move enough students to get the state, again, if we could eliminate it from the tape, get the state off our back on that issue. It does not strike me that the board has the desire to do anything further with class size guidelines. Just the sense that I have from, there's nobody that when two people said, I don't want to look at that, somebody said, no, I think we ought to look at that. That didn't come up. And so I would say that that's probably off the list, even though we've not taken any action on it. And we could formally, in August, put a motion on the table that says we will continue to follow up on, I'll say K235 would be an issue that would probably be part of that motion. The magnet program, the two parts of it, the IB as well as the innovative STEAM program, looking at both of those, and if somebody had a third option that they'd want to throw on the table. Redistricting would have to stay on there simply because we agreed that we, as part of the state plan, that it's the option of last resort, and if we don't find success someplace else with the other configurations, I think the ECC and Walter Fitzgerald has to stay on in 6. And so I would think there could be a motion in August that says we'll continue to follow up on these 5 items. Here's the timetable we're going to do it in special meetings of all 9 of us, and then be able to come to some conclusion with some initial facts that allow us to decide, yeah, this is worth exploring further, and what kind of real detail facts do we need. That's what I think I'm hearing, but I'm not sure. Ms. Pitko, Mrs. Gerber, Mr. Acer, and Ms. Jacobson.
I don't have my hand up.
Huh? Oh. Whose hand? Okay. What order did I thought I saw you put your hand up. Mrs. Gerber.
Well, I guess my question is regarding the K235. Because on the one hand, you were saying it seems that nobody on the board has any interest to go with just 2 schools.
That's the sense I'm getting.
Right,
So-
but then you're still leaving it on as a discussion item. I'm just trying to figure out what, so will we be getting information from staff to definitively be able to allow us to say, no, this definitely is not something we want to do? I'm just, again, this was discussed in March, and many board members asked specific questions regarding follow-up, and I'm just trying to get a sense of when we will get that information, because I would be more than happy, despite my vote tonight, to take this off as a topic, because I philosophically don't think that 2 schools should bear the brunt of the entire district. But I would like some specific information regarding this. So will we be able to get that information at the end of the summer or September 25th, just so that we can put this to bed? Because I completely agree, some of these topics we can't take off, as unappealing as they may be. We still need to discuss redistricting. We need to discuss ECC and Walter Fitzgerald. But if no one on this board has any desire to take 2 schools and change the way that they are made up, it would just be nice if we could have a specific discussion with specific information provided by staff to allow us to cross this off the list.
So my suggestion is that it stay on the list as a system-wide change and would be in the motion accordingly, therefore saying we are not going to consider it for just 2 schools. But I would ask this board to say, sorry to use this phrase, don't confuse me with the facts. This community is not ready to make that kind of a dramatic change in its elementary school configuration. And if that's what your sense of the body was, we'd prepare a motion that said this isn't even on in the motion. We're just not going to give it further consideration because we don't think that it's worth the staff time or board time debating something that we're just not there yet. So I think it is off the table as a 2-school idea. I'm only saying it's on the table for the whole system unless I hear differently from board members. Wait a second. Can I stay in order?
Sorry.
Mrs. Jacobson?
Oh.
And then Jeff Peterson.
First of all, I just wanted to say that the way that I voted on that was because I've asked for this to be on the agenda for months now, and I'm just kind of over the issue of it lingering out there without us ever getting to the actual conversation. So I would have been happy to take it off today. Number two, I did not mean to imply that someone didn't do their homework in order to make any decision tonight. What I meant was in response to Dr. Jones's and our chair's proposed schedule, and that we were not comfortable with that format, lending a hand going forward individually on some of these topics and sharing for those who would want to, in order to lighten that load and to at least have some sort of a hybrid model of what our superintendent has suggested, and some of us being willing to help out with some of that work so that we can get the information faster. In terms of Malone and McBroom, and Jennings and McKinley pairing was absolutely to solve racial imbalance, number one. And number two was in order to avoid making a smaller Mill Hill. It says exactly that in the presentation. It was two purposes, making a smaller Mill Hill, not to 504, and to solve racial imbalance. So if we don't want to use those two schools to solve those issues, then I don't know why we wouldn't remove that scenario. So, and Phil, if you have run numbers on 1.2 million on the K2 as a whole district-wide, I would love for you to share that information with me. I would like to see how you came to those numbers. So, just my thoughts on some of those things that were said. So, pardon and apologies if anything was misconstrued in a way that I definitely did not mean it to be so.
Mr. Acer, I think you were next, followed by Ms. Vitale and by Mr. Peterson.
Okay, so based on this discussion now, it sounds like we've gone down the path of exploring and wanting information for a system-wide grade reconfiguration, not speaking for me.
I only said that because I wanted the board to say, no, that's not what I'm thinking. And
Well, that's what I was saying before. That's the take I took out of it also.
so I've only heard from two that says, take it off.
That being said, if we are, to Mrs. Gerber's point, which I agree with, and that we had been asking for information on this before making a decision, there's a lot that goes into it, and obviously our job as a Board of Ed is looking at the educational aspect, the financial budget implications, et cetera. But there are repercussions that are exponential, potentially, with a plan like this. And I don't know if there's a way, Dr. Jones, that you can get a fiscal analysis or something from a town perspective, from a real estate perspective, because our school system and our families, we always talk about neighborhood schools, right? And that's like a fundamental thing here in Fairfield, and that's why people move here, and that's why people want to live here, and they choose the districts that they live in. They love their schools, et cetera. So that being said, if we start talking about changing the configuration of elementary schools, we're talking about changing the dynamics of the whole town and either attracting or detracting from people who live or are looking at the town. So I'm not sure, and I don't have the answer, but if there's a way, but if you're going to be presenting us with something, it might be good to try and figure out a way to incorporate something to that effect on what are the other ramifications outside of our purview, because yes, we're looking at this because we're beholden, to do a duty to the town, the taxpayers, the other town bodies. But that aspect of it we're not talking about right now, and I think it's very important, and I just wanted to raise the point.
Dr. Jones.
Yeah, and I really do appreciate that, and I think even when we go back to looking at when the board was asking in March for information, it's the same conversation we're having tonight, in that I do not know what the board is asking. And so, I can certainly go and get a $20,000 study to answer this question here: what are the cost savings to do this district-wide? Staff do not have the capability to go in and run every bus route, because buses are a huge component of this, and especially in Fairfield. It's not easy to compare two schools together. If you're asking me to bring a proposal, what do you do with school number 11? Are we going to move ECC into that school and then redistribute all of those? We can do that, but I don't want staff to spend an inordinate, you're talking hours and hours and hours of work, plus having to get a consultant to do some of this work if we really don't have the will to do this. And it's not that, there's going to be some cost efficiency, probably, but being district-wide in a K1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you're going to save it in sections, but you don't know until you dig in and really look at that. Doing it district-wide, I have no idea without really spending some money. And again, part of it is the logistics of our community and where our schools are sitting. I mean, our bus routes are already difficult where we run buses kind of semi-half empty or three-quarters because of the distance of the routes and trying to also keep the time short. So I think for me, that's, again, what I'm really asking for from the board. Are we looking at district-wide K1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Because that was not Malone and McBroom. It's never been recommended by staff. I am more than happy to do that work, but I need to know to do it because I have July and August to get some people engaged to really help us bring good hard numbers. The staff can't do it.
So just to follow up on that, if we were, let's say hypothetically, still talking about this plan with just 2 schools, which really is only to solve racial imbalance and no other reason, what would you say you could bring the board to present? And is there anything you could bring the board to present in September, just so the board knows?
Yeah, we can look at it for a K1, 2, 3, 4, 5, McKinley and Jennings, because they've already done that work with Malone and McBroom to be able to say, does it work even logistically for the number of students based on existing population we had last fall? Could we look at what that would mean for 2 schools to combine bus routes? Probably not with, it wouldn't be perfect, but we could actually look at, okay, it would take 1 additional bus or 5 additional buses. We could look at some of that. That is much easier when you go district-wide. It's a totally different ballgame. And because we have 11 schools, we don't have an even number of schools. So they're two very different, but it's never come from staff, and I want to be clear about that, about a K1, 2, 3, 4, 5 district-wide. And if that's what the board wants to explore, not staff, it didn't come from the structural change discussion, we will absolutely do the work.
And I'm betwixt and between, because my impression is that this board does not want to go down that path for just 2 schools. And to ask Mr. Asa to ask the staff to explore for those 2 schools is sending an opposite message. And so I will continue to say, I don't think this board wants to go down the path of a K2, 3, 5 just for 2 schools. And unless I hear 5 people saying, no, let's continue to look at it, in my mind, I'll prepare a motion about how we're going forward, and that will be off the table. I'm trying to find out from the board as to whether they want to look at it district-wide or not.
Well, I think the board has asked for a presentation and information, but we're being told that there really isn't anything to present. So
There's
not
no-
at a full.
There's no different educational value.
Yeah, so trying to get at what the other things. So one of them is busing, so that's a component that I heard. Educational value you've already spoken to. So are there any other aspects, I guess, that the board specifically wants? Because it sounds like we're not going to get anything.
Well, I think it's, again, if you're asking for a proposal, do you want us to look at moving the ECC into elementary schools and K1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Then you're actually collapsing a school, which is the ECC, and putting them back out. Do we have the seats out there? And especially if we build a 504, we may. But again, until we go in and really look at it, we won't know. And those are the sorts of efficiencies. It takes a tremendous amount of work, and it's going to take we're going to have to hire some expertise. And we can bring that to the board if that's what the board wants.
No, I'm not prepared to support that at this time.
I'm sorry, now, Mrs. Vitale.
Jeff.
I think Mr. Peterson was after you. But if you want to defer to Mr. Peterson so that he won't forget what he wanted to say.
I really just want to go back to before the word structural change was even uttered, because I feel like this entire discussion is trying to find structural change that the Board of Education really was not looking for until the Board of Finance asked for it. I think the overall sense of the body was that we're focused on education. We're going to move forward on that. We have a long-term facilities plan. We have a racial imbalance plan. And then, understandably so, everything, the uncertainty with state funding kind of got everybody thinking about new things and looking for savings anywhere we can find them. Things have changed since then, so I'm wondering why we're even having this discussion. I think the fact that we're still having it and not getting anywhere is probably telling, in that it's not something that we really should be doing. We really should probably just take some of these scenarios off the table. The grade reconfiguration, I don't think that anyone, I agree, I don't think anybody wants to single out 2 schools. I think the only reason why we keep on mentioning 2 schools is that it would be easier and more cost effective for staff to come up with some sort of number so we can make the decision. That said, if things turn around at the state level and we get a bill for $9 million in teacher pension, the discussion may change all over again, which is why I have been supportive of having these discussions now, because things can turn on a dime, and there is some value in looking at other possibilities that were never palatable to this town before. But I feel like that panic has passed, and that maybe we should really take some of this stuff off the table, and just get back to focusing staff time on educating our kids.
Mr. Peterson.
I've been pretty quiet through a lot of this discussion, I think because things have not gone as I anticipated that they might with this particular discussion. I think we are a good board, and I think we do great work when we get down together and when we discuss in detail, and everyone's very passionate. I think this particular discussion has been extremely inefficient, because all of the third rails that we've been talking about since I've been on the board and since I remember watching the board are all in this one memo. I voted for Mr. Ace's motion because, frankly, I heard at this meeting from Dr. Jones what I needed to hear to get over the hump. But I was one of the people at the March 19th meeting that wanted a little more information. That's my particular stance. We'll deal with that somewhere else. But I think that we could go on into the wee hours along the path that we are going now. And I think that what we need to do is kind of refocus on, it seems to me like what we need to do is bite the bullet and have special meetings. If we need to ask Dr. Jones and the administration for additional information, we can do that in a variety of ways through the chair, through direct contact with email. We are all in contact with each other on a kind of informal basis. These
Only
discussions
4 of you at a time. I'm sure for the purposes of
entirely
FOI, when they
within the
listen to this
confines
tape.
of the FOI
Yes.
restrictions of our state, yes. But these are things that we all have, very deep-seated opinions about and are prepared to discuss at length and passionately. And I frankly see no end to this discussion tonight, which, is fortunate and unfortunate. I think that what we need to do is come back to the purpose of the memo and try to figure out if there's a structure that we can use. And it seems like committee of the board is, the meeting of the 9 of us is probably the most productive way. Split some of these things up and come with a properly noticed set of meetings. And if they have to be extra meetings, my wife's going to hate me for this, then we should have extra meetings and deal with them formally rather than in this rather haphazard fashion, if you'll let me apologize for that.
So yes, I believe that we're going to have, as much as we can, make room on our agendas for a good length of time for conversation on these items, and if we can't, then we'll have to have a special meeting in order to capture all of them.
I suspect that we may have to have several special meetings.
Well, that's what I
I think that
mean,
we're
yes.
just going to need to prepare
Yeah.
for that
do we deal
eventuality.
with-
Because none of these issues is simple.
No, it isn't.
And none of these has been, if it were simple, it would have been solved by previous boards very quickly.
And so it'll be a series of meetings, depending on how efficient we are with our conversation, and whether there's enough information to say, no, we're not going to have any further conversation, this is off to the side. I'll say, with the exception of class size guidelines, I don't see this board saying, kick something off entirely. We're willing to at least get some information on some initial operational impacts of the K235. It's not going to be a full-blown, every answer on every question is given. because I honestly do not sense that this board, I'll say it directly, has the intestinal fortitude to make this kind of a dramatic change. So if we're not going to do that, why waste staff time looking at all the details? And so I would love this board to say, no, I can never, I just can't talk myself into making that kind of a change in our system. So, Phil, why don't you leave that off the motion of moving forward on the other items? And I'm more than happy to do so. Mrs. Gerber.
Okay, I just want to clarify. When you say that we are not going to have any further discussion on K235, are you talking about district-wide, Jennings-McKinley, or both?
I'm sorry, I guess I'm not clear. K235 is off the agenda for just Jennings and McKinley, period. It's off. If we're going to have any conversation about it, it's about district-wide.
Okay, well, to follow up on that then, we've just been told by our superintendent that her staff is not going to be able to do that, and that we're going to have to hire a consultant for $25,000. If I am incorrect, please correct me, but that's my understanding, and I don't believe anyone at this table wants to invest $25,000 in a consultant. So if that is the case, if we are going to have this conversation again, and we're going to be told again that staff, because they are very overloaded with important work that they need to do, is not able to do this, and that we will have to hire a consultant, I don't think we want to have that conversation in August or September or in October. So if we can, yes, I would love to get some numbers. I would love to get some ideas, but not at the cost of $25,000. So if we cannot get that information, even a basic outline, then I think we should take it off, because I don't think anyone here has the stomach for it. Definitely not in the two schools. And if it's going to cost us that much money, then I would rather not go down that road as well.
I'm waiting for concurrence. I have two.
Well, but I don't think it, if by you not putting it on the agenda, does it kill it? Or does it just stay lingering out there?
It goes away. It kills it.
So what, is it different than what my motion was? Because, no, I'm not joking, because my motion was to kill it.
Here's the difference. Some of us do not like to take action on items that weren't properly noticed.
Understood.
And several of the votes were from that perspective only.
Then all I would say is in August, I'd like it on the agenda to kill it as a motion. Or however you do it, but I just want it stated in public
That's
in the
two.
minutes that it's off.
I thought I said it before, like if, I say get rid of it.
That's three.
I mean, I get,
I
if
don't
it's gonna
need
cost us $30,000 to get an answer, get rid of it.
I don't need long comments. I just need to get direction from the board, that's all.
I already stated it.
Right? So that's four.
I already said it.
Five.
I voted my way.
Okay, so the motion that comes forward that says we'll follow up on the following items, and I'll find some words to say we've talked about item number 1 and item number 5, and for good and just reasons have decided not to pursue that, and the following items we will pursue. Is kind of where my head says that the board is going. And I'll only state it that way so that I can get clarity as to what the board wishes to do.
Wait, I don't have my memo.
And other than one board member by osmosis, I have not heard any board member say, we're not going to comply with racial imbalance. I've not heard a single board member, absent one, who would be willing to explore that.
Absent one.
Absent one. Is there more than one that wants to talk about that as an option?
At the last meeting, I was actually looking forward to Dr. Jones' presentation on the potential ramifications of that.
Two?
Over here.
I'm not advocating,
No, but that's
Yes.
two. I'm just trying to,
I'm willing to explore that, just like Jeff said.
if three people want to know what the ramifications are, we'll put that on as a, here's what the issue would be with that, and what would happen if we went down that path. And it's conjecture, because The state has never had somebody say, we're not going to comply with your regulation. And so there would have to be some conjecture on the part of our attorney as to what would happen if. And again, there's no definitiveness on it, but it would give you some sense. Mr. Acer, you want to?
No, I'm good, thank you. I'd like to, yeah, thank you.
Okay. Any further comment about where I've stated I think the board is headed? And if you have a thought in the meantime, just send me an email. Clearly, any board member can go on a tour of any school, and so any board members who want to look at ECC or the Walter Fitzgerald campus, it's always better to look at it when there are kids in it, so schedule yourself accordingly. You're welcome to look at it over the summer, but you know, it's hard to tell what a building looks like and operates like without kids in it. That's my advice whenever parents want to go look at a camp over the winter. Any other final comments on this topic, and then we have to move forward? Did you?
No, I was just going to say, I would, when the school's year starts again, I would be interested in putting my name on that list if there's other board members interested. So we do it all at once.
And we will split you up in groups of 4 or less, because if actually 5 of you went on a tour of the school, we'd have to notice that as a meeting. Any other comments that people wish to make? Okay. It's been a good, if not frustrating, conversation from time to time. Perhaps those who have stuck it out with us probably got the sense that you should not be as nervous as maybe you were walking in. Okay, so now on to item 6A, budget transfers. The recommended motion is that the Board of Education approve the line item transfers for the 2017-18 fiscal year as detailed in the financial statement for enclosure number 2. Do I have a motion? Mrs. Gerber? Mr. Acer? Mrs. Munsell, you have some comments that you want to make to us?
I'm going to concentrate on the budget transfers page. What we do, just so that you know how this comes together in June, what we do is do a preliminary June projection. And in that process, we had some changes in projected balances in a positive way. And you'll see those, some of those areas were in substitutes. We're always very careful that we project enough for substitutes, and there was some improvement there. We didn't, the balance was larger than what we thought. Some non-certified vacancies were unfilled, wage and benefit savings, legal fees. I think we're going to be fine with legal fees, transportation, electricity, and some equipment damage situation. So all of those areas had positive, were in a more positive situation when we did this on the 21st. So Dr. Jones decided to distribute that funding in different areas, and that funding that was distributed was included in each category where we think the spending is going to be spent for equipment, for instructional supplies, materials, and maintenance. So that's what comes down to the $40,000 balance. So we do that this way so that we can include the numbers in the proper category, so you can do the budget transfers tonight. And then, of course, these are still projections. There's, you know, it's not over till August, and then we'll present in the fall a final report.
So that board members, is that Mrs. Munsell?
Yeah.
So board members understand, we take a vote, but we allow the staff, when they actually close out the books, that if it requires a line item to be slightly adjusted up or down, then they just do that without us having to take another vote. Certainly if there was a major change in it that went well beyond just the minor changes, then of course the board would have to act, but generally it's always been just minor accounting changes based on year end. And as I understand it, this preserves the 600,000 and gives us about 40,000 left over, which could very well disappear between now and when you close the books.
It could, yep,
All right?
could be larger.
Questions from the board? Question from the board. This is an action item.
I'll add some comments to the end of the year if I get to.
Max and Canali, and Dr. Jones wants to make some comments.
Oh, I'll defer to Dr. Jones if she wants to go first.
Yeah, I just want to highlight a couple of things. First of all, I want to say thank you and congratulations to Ms. Mansell on this school year. We were just talking about it this morning, that this is probably the most challenging budget year I think people that have been in the business for decades have seen, starting the year with no budget, and then all the moving targets during the year. And also to the executive team, they did a good job of really tightening up all year long. If you were to go back and look at the projections in December, we were projecting that we were already in the hole $2.1 million in special education. We're very happy that by the end of the year, it's still a big number, but it was at 1.5. And again, we think our projections next year are going to help us not have quite as big a hole. But they did an excellent job of bringing some students back into the district to balance if we had new students going out in special education. Also really managing in all those curriculum and facilities areas. I will just point out, I know Ms. Mansell mentioned it, that we had the list of frozen items we've tried to keep the board apprised of throughout the year. We had already given back the maintenance funding, that 916. We had also given back the technology restored funds, which we had let the board know literally within the last few weeks. When we knew as we're closing everything out, we were able to take that 10% allocation back to the schools. So what I asked that we do with that this year was it went straight to the principal, and the principal really looked at their building on what could they really target as a larger project. Because it's too late in the year to go give every teacher an extra $100 to try to process. And they are really doing some great implementation project sort of work at their buildings. Both of our high schools are putting in innovation spaces, which is something they've really wanted. All of our middle schools are doing lots of flexible furniture and implementing some innovation kind of materials. All of our elementary schools, we were able to take and look at the inequities that were kind of out in the school with Lego robotics, or could be Spiros that they use for coding, making sure that we balanced all of our schools, and our STEAM teachers worked really hard over the last couple weeks. So I just wanted you to be aware that that money went back to the schools, and then we were able to reinstate that equitably for all of the schools, because you don't necessarily see that detail on the sheet that we give you. And then I would just point out that you can kind of see some of the equipment balance and then that reserve balance, which is line 29, just making sure you know that we don't still have things in reserve, because sometimes when people look at this, they think that it's still frozen. That's funding that, as we talk about these transfers, to close those gaps, and the main gap is in special education spending.
Mrs. Maxon Cannelli.
So I'm sure there's a very easy answer to this, but because I couldn't find it, I just want to ask so I can stop thinking about it. As I look on, and they don't have numbers, so I don't know how to reference them, the one that says the 2017-18 budget transfers, it's the single sheet with small type.
This one?
And then, I think so, yes. And then the one that says the major classifications and summary object. I don't understand why the first set of numbers, I can't find what they correspond to on the second. So that when we're talking about, I'll pick a small category, fixed charges, where we're talking about, an end of year balance of $643,000. Then when I look on fixed charges on the major classification and summary object, where is $643,000? I'm just not understanding how to look at one piece of information through the lens of the other.
Okay, on the budget transfer single sheet, the projected balance in that category is 643.
Right.
On the financials, as of June 21st, the balance was 661 in that category, all the way over to the right.
Mm-hmm.
Because as of 6/21, we hadn't spent everything in that, Social Security on the salaries that haven't been paid yet, hasn't hit, and the pension retirement, there's still 401A expenses that'll come down. So that'll bring that 661, we think, down to the 643. See what I'm saying?
And so if I jump straight above that where it says on the major classification and summary object page where it says the 1.22 million,
Same thing.
on the left, we say 531,000 over. The small sheet on the left represents what's anticipated.
Correct.
I guess because they were both produced June 21st, I wasn't understanding why I couldn't match the numbers up.
Because the financial report, the 2-page report, is actual as of that point in time. But there's a lot of activity going on in my office between June 21st and the end of June. I think payroll has to run something like 5 payrolls for teachers for each one of the payrolls that happens over the summer, and then biweekly people that aren't necessarily paid over the summer, but on a biweekly basis, and then a weekly payroll. So there's just a lot of activity that happens.
So the point, I'm not reading it wrong. In fact,
You're not
these numbers
reading it wrong.
can't be found over here. They represent what is anticipated.
Right.
Okay, that was just driving me crazy.
One is projected, the other is actual as of a certain date. Other questions from board members? Seeing none, out to the public, anybody wish to comment on the budget transfers items that are before us? If so, please come forward. Seeing nobody come forward, back to the board. Ready to act on the motion that the Board of Education approve the line item transfers for the 2017-18 fiscal year as detailed in the financial statement per enclosure number 2. All in favor, please raise your hand. It is unanimous, 9-0. Thank you very much. Let me do the minutes quickly, and then I'm going to ask a question about timing. We're down at item 7. Yeah, that the Board of Education approve the special meeting minutes of June 7th, 2018, and June 12th, 2018, and the regular minutes of June 12th, 2018. Do I have a motion? Mrs. Gerber, Ms. Pitko? Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please raise your hand. It's unanimous. Thank you very much. Do you have much in superintendent's report? No. Can we, in 12 minutes, can we get by the committee and stuff, or shall we have a motion to extend? No. We can get by, okay. Nothing item on any committee liaison reports?
Excuse me, Mr. Would it be possible for you to ask if members of the public want to speak? Because some people may have wanted to wait till the end of the meeting. I'm sorry to say that. And last time I didn't even vote to extend, but just a suggestion.
We're burning time. Is there any member of the public that will want me to make sure that I reserve enough time? Our bylaws say once we get to 11 o'clock without a motion to extend, we're done. Any member of the public planning on coming forward and speaking to the board now that you've heard us talk? Raise your hand. I don't see anybody. Okay. That answers that question. Because we'll extend the meeting if members of the public want to say something, so don't not do it because of the time. But then please step forward. Well, no, wait your turn, and then we'll do committee liaison reports. How about this, a motion to extend the meeting to 11:10? Mrs. Maxon Kennelly, seconded by Mrs. Vitale. Any questions, any comments? If not, all in favor, please raise your hand. 9-0. We're meeting until 11:10. Thank you very much. Committee liaison reports. Who's up?
I'll start since I'm at the end of the table. Just from the Board of Finance, we got this email from the chair about the new policy on debt issuance. Basically, there was a discussion about trying to have a firm policy about limiting, as a third bullet is kind of the interesting one in some ways, no more than 10% of gross expenditures. Second bullet is kind of the key point there.
This is a long-standing practice that the staff of the town and the Finance Committee felt it's about time to put it in writing. And so that's what, this is not a, quote, new, it's a new policy, but it's a old practice. Anything else from the Board of Finance? Mrs. Maxon Connelly.
Just briefly, obviously, thank you to Dr. Jones for getting word out to the board quickly regarding the graduation requirements. Our last meeting, policy meeting, where we took a look at, again, based on feedback from staff and from board members, it was cut short a little bit. We also were not at full strength, and there was no reason to rush it. The bulk of the policy was done. I think the bulk of the policy, it was very clear the sense of the body had support so that staff would be able to go ahead this summer with some of its planning because there were no objections raised, but that there were a few parts that we did need to take more time on, and there was no, Dr. Jones absolutely supported the idea of we don't have to rush this, we have enough direction. So the policy will be taking up graduation requirements again in the fall, and I'm not putting any promises of a timeline because I have been wrong in the past, so it will be coming back.
So the board knows that Mr. Acer and I are going to meet with the superintendent to pursue the conversation around community service. I think both of us had an impression that there were other board members who also had an interest in that area. So we were going to meet with the superintendent around what that could look like. And my commitment to Mrs. Maxon Connelly, personally, I can't speak for Mr. Acer, is that I would want to take a proposal like that and put it through her committee rather than bring it directly to the board. And so that's what we intend to do, and hopefully get our act together so that when you meet in August, you'll have something or nothing. Any questions for Mrs. Maxon Connelly on policy? Anybody else have committee liaison reports to make? Mrs. Gerber?
Just really briefly, the Ludlow windows will be starting next week. Their trucks and whatnot are coming this week, and they'll be getting going with that. And last night at the RTM, the Mill Hill Building Committee was approved, and I just received a memo today from the First Selectman's office that they will be setting up a meeting schedule for Mill Hill soon.
Any questions for Mrs. Gerber? Mrs. Vitale. Mrs. Vitale.
Chairman Building Committee has met, actually met last night. I was on vacation, missed that, but Eric Lang is the chair, and I believe they got their meeting schedule, so they're up and running.
And I presume they picked a meeting schedule that works for you?
I don't know. I was not at the meeting.
Haven't seen the.
I have not seen it yet.
Okay. Any questions?
I think so.
Okay, any questions for Ms. Vitale? If the dates don't work, well, then I'll have to go to option B or C based on people who were saying that they might be willing to serve. Mr. Acer, did you raise your hand for a committee liaison report?
What was that answer to?
Ms. Vitale said she's willing to serve as long as the meeting dates meet her schedule. Once she gets the dates, if that's not true, then I might have to come back to the board for that.
No, my question was just, has a liaison been assigned to Mill Hill yet, or no?
Yes, that's Mrs.
Okay, sorry, I missed that.
Yeah.
Although, again, if there is a conflict with meeting dates, I may have to rethink it, but they haven't met for the first time, so we'll just have to see.
If they have the same chair, no, Christine would kill me. Any other comments on committee liaison reports? If not, any open board comment? Mr. Peterson.
I'm sorry it's late, but I'm gonna take 30 seconds here. Last week, my freshman English teacher passed away, Ina Cleric from Ward. She was literally the first teacher I had at Ward. Do you have Mrs. Cleric? She was great. This was a woman who was tough as nails, but was a great spirit, like humorous, fantastic person to relate to, had a meaningful impact on my life. Went to Ward, graduated Ward, taught at Ward, lived in Fairfield. I ran into her several times. She remembered me. It's just, I regret her passing, but I just wanted to remember her fondly in a education-themed environment, and it seemed appropriate that I wanted to say thank you.
It's well worth 30 seconds. Thank you very much. Any other open board comments? Okay. Thank you, sir. Any member of the public that wishes to come forward, please come forward, state your name and address.
Robert LaMonica, 138 Woodridge Avenue. First, let me thank you all for your dedication to our schools and our students. I appreciate that, and I got to witness that tonight. I think you should seriously consider not complying with the racial imbalance law. If it's never been done before, there's a good opportunity to do it now. I think we have a strong case to make. With regard to asking the attorney to look at the town's attorney to look at the implications of that, that should be both financial and injunctive. And I think it would be helpful to the town's legal community if he included his sources in that report to you so that the lawyers in town can look at that as well. I'm sure he could tap a pro bono committee of lawyers in this town to look at it further. And then finally, I think if the public comment is going to be a little bit of a war of attrition, it might be nice at the outset to let people who've never been to a meeting know before that the public comment at the beginning is for everything, not even things that haven't been discussed yet. So I would appreciate that on a go-forward basis. I don't think I would have stayed for the full 3 hours had I known that that was the time to address something that was down in 5C on the list, particularly because things could be moved about as necessary to accommodate certain members of the professional staff. We might also consider accommodating, the public as well, which is why that item is there, but I don't think any of us knew that. Thank you very much.
Unfortunately, those of us who are at these meetings all the time, when I say any public comment on any agenda item at the front of the meeting, that probably did not come across as clear to you. But should you come back, the public comment at the beginning and at the end are both for any business item that's on the agenda. With no further comment, a motion to adjourn. Mrs. Gerber, seconded by Ms. Pitko. All in favor, raise your hand. Look at that. We didn't need the extra.